I wish you were mine. 4 whispered words in a dark parking lot. Words that would destroy an empire, shatter a billion-dollar engagement, and turn a single father mechanic into the most dangerous man in the company. But here's what nobody saw coming. The woman who whispered those words? She wasn't just some executive consultant. She was the secret CEO, the actual owner. And she'd just confessed her feelings to a man who fixed brake pads for minimum wage. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Because what happened next? Nobody could have predicted it. The fluorescent lights in Bay 3 had been flickering for 2 weeks, casting irregular shadows across the oil-stained concrete floor where Daniel Brooks worked in deliberate silence. His hands moved with the kind of practiced efficiency that came from 10 years of fixing things nobody else noticed were broken. Worn gaskets, corroded terminals, the small mechanical failures that kept a fleet of delivery trucks grinding through their routes. It was nearly 8 o'clock on a Thursday evening in late October. Most of the maintenance crew had clocked out hours ago, leaving Daniel alone with a stubborn transmission that refused to shift smoothly into third gear. He didn't mind the quiet. In fact, he preferred it. The solitude gave him space to think about the only thing that truly mattered, getting home to Lily. His daughter would be waiting with Mrs. Chen next door, probably already in her pajamas, fighting sleep until her dad walked through the door. 7 years old and stubborn as hell, she got that from her mother. Daniel tightened the last bolt on the transmission housing and wiped his hands on a shop rag that had long ago surrendered to permanent grease stains. His knuckles ached in the way they always did when October temperatures dropped and reminded him he wasn't 22 anymore. 32 felt different than he'd imagined it would back when Sarah was still alive. Back when the future looked like something other than a series of careful, controlled days built around stability and bedtime stories. He gathered his tools methodically, returning each one to its designated spot in the rolling cabinet that had followed him through 3 different job sites. Organization wasn't just habit, it was survival. When you were responsible for a small human who depended entirely on you showing up, being present, being reliable, you didn't leave room for chaos. The walk from the maintenance bay to the employee parking lot took Daniel through a section of the facility he rarely saw after hours. The administrative building loomed to his left, its glass facade reflecting the sodium vapor lights that turned everything the color of old photographs. Most of the windows were dark now, but a few still glowed on the upper floors where the salaried employees worked. The people who wore clean clothes and dealt with problems that didn't leave grease under their fingernails. Daniel had nothing against them. They lived in a different world, that was all. His world smelled like motor oil and solvent. Theirs smelled like coffee and printer toner. The 2 worlds didn't overlap, or at least they hadn't until tonight. Daniel was halfway across the lot when he noticed the car, a sleek black sedan parked at an angle near the far edge, its hood raised like a surrender flag. The parking lot was mostly empty at this hour, just a scattered handful of vehicles belonging to the cleaning crew and whoever was stuck working late upstairs. But this car was different. Even from a distance, Daniel could tell it was expensive. The kind of vehicle that cost more than he made in a year, maybe 2 years. And standing beside it, silhouetted against the harsh overhead lights, was a woman who looked exactly as out of place as the car itself. Daniel hesitated. Every practical instinct told him to keep walking. He'd already worked a 10-hour shift. Lily was waiting. Whatever problem this woman had with her luxury sedan wasn't his responsibility. But then she looked up. And something in that glance, frustration, exhaustion, maybe a flicker of genuine helplessness, made him change direction. "Car trouble?" Daniel called out as he approached, immediately recognizing how stupid the question sounded given the raised hood and the woman's obvious distress. She turned fully toward him, and Daniel got his first clear look at her face. Mid-30s, he guessed. Dark hair pulled back in a style that suggested she'd started the day looking impeccable and had slowly deteriorated into something merely professional. She wore a charcoal blazer over a white blouse, both perfectly tailored, and her expression carried the particular weariness of someone unaccustomed to things not working exactly as they should. "Please tell me you know something about engines," she said, and her voice had an edge of desperation that didn't quite match the composed exterior. Daniel set down his tool bag and moved closer to the car. "I might. What happened?" "It just died. I was about to leave, turned the key, and nothing. No sound at all. No clicking? No grinding? Nothing. Completely dead. Daniel leaned over the engine compartment, pulling a small flashlight from his pocket. The engine was clean, almost suspiciously clean, like it had been detailed recently, and for a moment he just studied the layout, tracing the systems in his mind. You mind if I try starting it? He asked. Please. The woman handed him the key fob, and Daniel slid into the driver's seat. The interior smelled like leather and something floral, perfume maybe, or one of those expensive air fresheners that came standard in cars like this. He turned the key. Nothing. Not even a dashboard light. Complete electrical failure, Daniel muttered, climbing back out. Could be the battery, but given how new this car looks, I'm guessing something else. He returned to the engine compartment, this time running his flashlight along the serpentine belt path. And there it was, a worn alternator belt, frayed along one edge and loose enough that it probably wasn't generating any charge. Found your problem, Daniel said, straightening up. Alternator belt's about to snap. Battery's probably drained because the alternator hasn't been charging it. The woman stepped closer, peering into the engine compartment as if she could verify his diagnosis through sheer force of will. Can you fix it? Not here. Not tonight. You'd need a new belt, and even if I had one, it's too dark to do the work properly. Daniel checked his watch, 8:15. I can jump the battery, might give you enough charge to get somewhere safer than an empty parking lot, but you'll need to get this to a shop tomorrow. A shop, she repeated, and something in her tone suggested that dealing with mechanics and repair appointments ranked somewhere below root canals on her list of preferred activities. Yeah, or call a tow truck, have it taken to a dealer. At 8 o'clock on a Thursday night? Daniel shrugged. I can jump it for you. Might get you home. Might not. It's a gamble. She considered this for a long moment, and Daniel found himself studying her more carefully. There was something familiar about her face, like he'd seen her somewhere before, but he couldn't place it. The company employed over 300 people across multiple divisions. They didn't all know each other. Okay, she said finally. Yes, please. Daniel retrieved the jumper cables from his truck, a battered Ford Ranger that had seen better decades, and positioned it nose to nose with her sedan. The process took less than 5 minutes. Red to positive, black to negative, let the charge build. While they waited, the woman stood beside him in what Daniel initially assumed would be awkward silence. But it wasn't awkward. It was comfortable. Like they were two people sharing space without needing to fill it with meaningless conversation. Daniel noticed she was watching him work, not in a supervisory way, but with genuine curiosity, like she was trying to understand the logic behind each movement. You work here? She asked eventually. At the company? Yeah, maintenance division. Vehicle repair, mostly. How long? Almost 7 years. She nodded slowly. Do you like it? The question surprised him. Most people asked what he did, not whether he liked doing it. It's steady work, good benefits. Lets me be home for my daughter most nights. You have a daughter? Lily. She's 7. That's a nice name. Her mother picked it. Daniel said it simply, without elaboration, and something in his tone must have communicated that the subject was closed because the woman didn't press further. The battery needed another minute, so Daniel leaned against his truck and studied the parking lot. Sodium vapor lights created pools of amber illumination separated by stretches of shadow. In the distance, traffic hummed along the highway, a constant white noise that never quite disappeared. I don't know your name, the woman said quietly. Daniel. Daniel Brooks. Elena, she replied and extended her hand. Her grip was firm, professional, but her skin was surprisingly cold. Daniel wondered how long she'd been standing out here before he showed up. You new to the company, Elena? Relatively. A few weeks? What department? She hesitated just slightly. Consulting. I'm evaluating operational efficiency. That explained the expensive car and the tailored clothes. Corporate consultants always looked like they'd stepped out of a business magazine, polished to the point of seeming almost artificial. Well, Daniel said, disconnecting the jumper cables, try starting it now. Elena slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine caught immediately, rumbling to life with the smooth confidence of German engineering. She looked genuinely relieved. Thank you, she said, climbing out. Seriously, I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't. You would have called a tow truck like any sensible person, Daniel interrupted with a slight smile. Instead, you trusted a stranger with jumper cables. You don't look particularly dangerous. Mechanics rarely do. It's part of our charm. Elena laughed, a real laugh, not the polite corporate sound people make at networking events. It changed her whole face, made her look younger and less guarded. I should let you get home, she said, glancing at the time on her phone. Your daughter's probably waiting. Yeah. Daniel gathered his cables and closed the hood of her car. Get that belt replaced tomorrow. Don't wait. I won't. He was walking back to his truck when she spoke again, so quietly that he almost didn't hear it over the idling engine. 4 words. Barely a whisper. I wish you were mine. Daniel froze mid-step. For a moment he thought he'd imagined it, a trick of the wind or his tired mind filling in sounds that weren't there. But when he turned back toward Elena, her expression told him everything he needed to know. She'd said it, and immediately regretted saying it. Elena had already turned away, focusing intently on something inside her car, like the words had never left her mouth. Her shoulders were rigid, her movements suddenly mechanical. Daniel stood there in the parking lot, jumper cables dangling from one hand, trying to process what had just happened. I wish you were mine. 4 words that didn't make sense. 4 words that changed absolutely everything. Elena, thank you for your help, she said quickly, her voice carefully neutral now, professional. I appreciate it. She was in the car before Daniel could respond, the door closing with the solid thunk of precision engineering. Through the tinted window, he could barely see her silhouette, but he knew she wasn't looking at him. The sedan pulled away smoothly, its headlights sweeping across the parking lot before disappearing toward the exit. Daniel stood alone under the amber lights, listening to the sound of the engine fade into the general hum of distant traffic. I wish you were mine. He should forget about it, should dismiss it as a moment of stress-induced confusion from a woman whose car had just broken down. People said strange things when they were frustrated and tired. It didn't mean anything, except Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that it had meant everything. By the time Daniel got home, it was nearly 9 o'clock. Mrs. Chen greeted him at the door with her usual mixture of grandmotherly warmth and mild reproach. She fought sleep for an hour, Mrs. Chen said, nodding toward the living room where Lily was curled up on the couch, eyes closed, still wearing her school clothes. Insisted you promised to read chapter 4 tonight. I did promise, Daniel admitted, feeling the familiar weight of parental guilt settle across his shoulders. Work ran late. Work always runs late. Mrs. Chen patted his arm gently. She's fine, just tired. After Mrs. Chen left, Daniel carried Lily to her bedroom. She barely stirred, just mumbled something about dinosaurs and arithmetic, and tucked her in without bothering to change her clothes. Tomorrow was Friday. They'd survived another week. He stood in her doorway for a moment, watching the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. 7 years old. Half the time he looked at her, he still saw the infant she'd been, small enough to cradle in one arm. The other half, he saw glimpses of the teenager she'd become, stubborn, opinionated, terrifyingly smart. I wish you were mine. The words drifted through his thoughts again, uninvited. Daniel shook his head and retreated to the kitchen, where he assembled a depressing dinner of reheated pasta and ate it standing at the counter while scrolling through work emails on his phone. Nothing important, just the usual maintenance requests and supply orders. But his mind wasn't on work anymore. He kept replaying the moment in the parking lot, Elena's expression when she realized what she'd said, the way she'd retreated into professional distance so quickly it felt like watching a door slam shut. She'd meant it. Whatever else was unclear, that much was obvious. People didn't say things like that by accident, didn't let words slip out unless they'd been thinking them for longer than they wanted to admit. But why? They'd just met, spent maybe 20 minutes together, most of it in silence while a battery charged. Daniel knew he wasn't particularly special, decent enough looking maybe, but nothing that would make a corporate consultant in a luxury sedan suddenly confess, what? Attraction? Loneliness? He dumped the rest of his pasta in the trash, it had gone cold anyway, and headed for the shower. Under the hot water, Daniel finally allowed himself to think about Elena more carefully. The way she'd watched him work with genuine interest rather than impatience, the comfortable silence between them, that laugh when he'd made a stupid joke about mechanics being harmless, and underneath all of it, something else. A kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with broken cars or late nights at the office. Daniel recognized it because he carried the same weight himself. The particular tiredness that came from living a life that looked fine on the surface but felt hollow underneath. Going through the motions, doing what was expected, being responsible and practical and all the things you were supposed to be, while some part of you quietly suffocated. I wish you were mine. Maybe Elena hadn't been talking about him specifically. Maybe she'd been talking about the idea of him, of someone straightforward and honest, someone who fixed simple problems with simple solutions, someone whose life wasn't tangled up in corporate politics and performance reviews. Or maybe Daniel was overthinking the whole thing. He shut off the water and dried himself roughly, trying to scrub away the thoughts along with the day's grime. It didn't matter what Elena had meant. She was a consultant from corporate. He was a mechanic who went home smelling like transmission fluid. Their worlds had collided for 20 minutes in a parking lot, and now they'd returned to their separate orbits. That was how these things worked. Daniel checked on Lily one more time, still sleeping soundly, and collapsed into his own bed, exhausted in a way that went deeper than physical tiredness. He fell asleep thinking about 4 whispered words and a woman's face in the amber light. Bullshit. Friday morning arrived with the aggressive cheerfulness of Lily's alarm clock, some pop song about friendship that she'd insisted on downloading and now played at full volume every weekday at 6:30. Daniel stumbled into her room and shut it off, then gently shook her shoulder. Time to get up, kiddo. 5 more minutes. You said that yesterday, and the day before. Come on. Lily groaned dramatically but hauled herself upright, her dark hair forming a chaotic halo around her head. She had her mother's eyes, sharp and observant, missing nothing. You were late last night, she said accusingly. I know. I'm sorry. You promised chapter 4. I'll read 2 chapters tonight, promise. You better. Lily scrambled out of bed and headed for the bathroom, already planning her outfit with the serious consideration most people reserved for job interviews. Daniel made breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, the same thing they ate every Friday, while Lily got dressed. Their morning routine had been refined over years into a precise choreography. Wake up, breakfast, teeth brushing, backpack check, shoes out the door by 7:20, no wasted time, no surprises. Exactly how Daniel needed it to be. They drove to Lily's school in comfortable silence, the radio playing quietly in the background. Daniel had learned early on that his daughter wasn't a morning person. She needed at least an hour to become fully human, so he didn't try to force conversation. Dad? Lily said as they pulled into the drop-off lane. Yeah? Are you okay? The question caught him off guard. Of course. Why? She studied him with those sharp eyes. You seem weird. Weird how? I don't know, just weird. Daniel reached over and ruffled her hair, which she immediately tried to smooth back down. I'm fine, Lil. Just tired. Long week. Okay. She didn't sound entirely convinced, but she grabbed her backpack and climbed out of the truck. Don't forget, 2 chapters tonight. 2 chapters. Got it. He watched her disappear into the stream of kids flooding toward the school entrance, her pink backpack bouncing with each step. You seem weird. Out of the mouths of 7-year-olds. Daniel pulled back into traffic and headed toward work, trying to convince himself that Lily was wrong, that he wasn't acting any different than usual. But kids had a way of seeing things adults tried to hide. The maintenance bay felt different when Daniel arrived. Nothing had physically changed. Same flickering lights, same oil stains, same radio playing classic rock at low volume, but the atmosphere had shifted in some subtle way he couldn't quite identify. Marcus, one of the other mechanics, looked up from the brake job he was working on and grinned. Well, well, look who decided to show up. I'm not late, Daniel said, checking the clock. It's 7:50. Didn't say you were late, just said you decided to show up. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag, still grinning. Heard you had an interesting night. Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. What? Come on, man, don't play dumb. The executive in the parking lot? Jamie from the loading dock saw the whole thing. There was nothing to see. Her car broke down. I jumped the battery. That's not how Jamie tells it. Then Jamie needs better hobbies than making up stories. But Marcus's grin didn't fade. Just saying, word gets around, especially when it involves someone like that. Someone like what? New corporate consultant, the one everyone's been talking about, supposedly here to evaluate whether we're all doing our jobs correctly. Marcus returned to his brake job, but his tone carried an edge now. Might want to be careful, Daniel. Management doesn't like fraternization. There's no fraternization. I helped someone with car trouble. That's it. If you say so. Daniel dropped the subject and focused on his work schedule for the day. 3 vehicles needed routine maintenance. One had a mysterious electrical problem, and the fleet manager wanted a full diagnostic report on the delivery vans by end of business. Normal work. Productive work. Work that didn't involve thinking about parking lots or whispered confessions. Except he couldn't stop thinking about it. And apparently, neither could anyone else. Throughout the morning, Daniel noticed the glances. Subtle, but unmistakable. Coworkers watching him a beat too long. Conversations that stopped when he walked past. The particular quality of attention that meant people were talking about him when he wasn't around. It was ridiculous. He jumped a battery, helped a stranger. 5 minutes of basic human decency, and somehow it had become office gossip. By lunch, Daniel's irritation had crystallized into genuine anger. He ate his sandwich in his truck, door locked, trying to ignore the text message from Marcus. Supervisor wants to see you. 1 p.m. Conference room B. Perfect. Tom Richardson had been Daniel's supervisor for 6 years. A decent enough guy who'd worked his way up from the maintenance floor and understood the reality of their jobs. But he was also a company man, which meant when corporate said jump, Tom asked how high. Close the door, Tom said when Daniel entered the conference room. Daniel closed it and sat down, waiting. Tom leaned back in his chair, studying Daniel with an expression somewhere between sympathy and frustration. I'm going to be straight with you because I don't like playing games. There's been some talk about you and a woman in the parking lot last night. Her car broke down. I helped. End of story. I believe you, but perception matters, Daniel, especially when the woman in question is a consultant from headquarters. So I should have just walked past, left her stranded? No. But you should understand that when you interact with corporate employees, particularly new ones who are here evaluating operations, people notice, and they make assumptions. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. What assumptions? That you're trying to gain favor, or create connections that might benefit you professionally, or, Tom paused, that something inappropriate is developing. Nothing is developing, appropriate or otherwise. Good. Then we won't have any problems. Tom's expression softened slightly. Look, I'm not trying to give you a hard time. You're one of my best mechanics, and I don't want to see you get caught up in office politics. Just maintain boundaries. Keep things professional. They are professional. Then keep them that way. Daniel left the conference room feeling like he'd been punished for basic decency. The unfairness of it burned, not hot and explosive, but cold and steady. The kind of anger that settled into your bones. He'd helped someone. That was all. And somehow, it had become a liability. The afternoon dragged. Daniel threw himself into work, finding comfort in problems that had clear solutions. Replace the worn brake pads, flush the transmission fluid, trace the short in the electrical system. Simple, mechanical, fixable, unlike everything else. He was under a delivery van, wrestling with a stubborn oil filter, when he heard footsteps approach the bay. Not the heavy work boots of his coworkers, but something lighter, more deliberate. Daniel? He knew the voice immediately. Daniel rolled out from under the van to find Elena standing at the edge of the bay, looking profoundly out of place in her tailored navy suit and heels. She held a tablet in one hand and wore an expression of careful neutrality. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" she asked. Every instinct told Daniel to say no, to maintain the boundaries his supervisor had just warned him about, to protect himself from whatever complications were forming around this woman. But he still heard himself say, "Yeah, sure." Elena waited while he wiped his hands and walked over to where she stood. Up close, he could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight shadows under her eyes that suggested she'd slept about as well as he had. I need to apologize, Elena said quietly. For last night. What I said, it was inappropriate and unprofessional, and I shouldn't have put you in that position. You don't need to apologize. Yes, I do. I heard there's been talk about us because someone saw us in the parking lot. Her expression tightened. And I heard you got called into a meeting with your supervisor. How did you? Daniel stopped. Corporate consultant. Right. You hear things. I hear things, she confirmed. And I'm sorry you're dealing with consequences for something that was entirely my fault. Daniel studied her carefully. Whatever walls she'd had up last night in the parking lot were back in place now, reinforced with professional distance. But underneath them, he could still see the exhaustion, the quiet desperation. Why did you say it? He asked. Elena blinked. What? Last night, those words, why did you say them? For a moment, she looked like she might deflect, might hide behind the consultant persona and pretend the question was inappropriate. But then something in her expression shifted, a small surrender. Because it was true, she said simply. The honesty hung between them like something fragile and dangerous. I don't understand, Daniel said. Neither do I. Elena glanced around the maintenance bay, making sure they were alone. I saw you working last night, and you were so calm, so focused, like the only thing that mattered in the world was fixing that problem correctly. And I thought, she stopped herself. It doesn't matter what I thought. It might. No, it really doesn't. Elena straightened her shoulders, rebuilding her professional armor. I came here to apologize and to make sure you knew that I'll be speaking with your supervisor, making it clear that you acted entirely appropriately and that any rumors are baseless. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. This is my fault, and you shouldn't suffer for it. She turned to leave, and Daniel knew he should let her go, should let this entire strange situation fade back into normalcy. Instead, he heard himself speak. Are you okay? Elena stopped but didn't turn around. What? You just seem... Daniel searched for the right words. Like you're carrying something heavy. A long silence stretched between them. When Elena finally looked back at him, her professional mask had slipped just slightly. I'm fine. It was obviously a lie. Okay, Daniel said quietly. Elena hesitated, and for a moment it seemed like she might say something else, something real. But then the mask snapped fully back into place. Thank you again for your help last night, she said formally, and I apologize for any complications I caused. This time when she walked away, Daniel didn't try to stop her. He stood in the maintenance bay, surrounded by the smell of oil and metal, and wondered what the hell was happening to his carefully controlled life. The weekend passed slowly. Daniel took Lily to her soccer game on Saturday morning. They lost 3-1, but Lily scored their only goal and was insufferably proud of herself. Sunday they went to the park, fed ducks at the pond, and read 4 chapters of the book they'd been working through together. Normal life. Good life. The kind of life Daniel had built deliberately, one careful decision at a time. But his mind kept drifting back to Thursday night, to 4 whispered words and a woman who looked like she was drowning in her own life. I wish you were mine. Daniel tried to analyze it rationally. Elena was clearly going through something difficult. Stress from work, maybe, or personal problems she couldn't talk about. And he'd been convenient, available, a momentary escape from whatever she was dealing with. It didn't mean anything beyond that, except he couldn't shake the feeling that it had meant exactly what it sounded like. By Monday morning, Daniel had convinced himself that the entire situation would simply fade away. Elena would finish whatever consulting work had brought her to the company, return to headquarters, and his life would return to its comfortable routine. But when he arrived at work, Marcus was waiting with news. Did you hear? Marcus asked, barely able to contain his excitement. Hear what? The new CEO announcement. They're making it official today. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. What announcement? The company got bought out 6 months ago, new ownership structure. And apparently the new CEO has been here for the past few weeks, working undercover or some corporate spy shit, evaluating everything before taking over officially. The fluorescent light seemed suddenly too bright. Who is it? Daniel asked, though some part of him already knew the answer. Marcus grinned. That consultant everyone's been talking about, Elena Navarro. Turns out she's not just some corporate evaluator. She owns like 60% of the company. Been here studying operations before she takes control. Daniel's world tilted slightly. Elena Navarro. The woman whose car he'd jumped. The woman who'd whispered 4 impossible words in a dark parking lot. She wasn't a consultant. She was the CEO. She owned the company. "You okay?" Marcus asked, noticing Daniel's expression. "You look like you're going to be sick." "I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine, because suddenly the parking lot conversation meant something entirely different. The rumors took on new weight, and the professional boundaries his supervisor had warned him about became a canyon so wide Daniel couldn't even see the other side. Elena Navarro wasn't just some corporate employee. She was his boss's boss. The person who controlled every aspect of his employment, his livelihood, his ability to provide for his daughter. And she'd told him she wished he was hers. Daniel made it through the morning on autopilot, his hands performing familiar tasks while his mind reeled. Around 10 o'clock, an email went out to all employees announcing a mandatory company meeting at 2 p.m. in the main assembly area. The official CEO introduction. Daniel spent the next 4 hours trying to figure out how he was supposed to feel. Angry? Confused? Betrayed that Elena hadn't told him who she really was? Except she'd never claimed to be just a consultant. He'd assumed that. And she certainly hadn't been obligated to reveal her identity to a mechanic she'd met for 20 minutes. But she'd known who he was. She'd known exactly how inappropriate those whispered words were, and she'd said them anyway. Why? At 2 o'clock, Daniel joined the stream of employees filing into the assembly area, a large open space normally used for equipment storage but cleared out now for rows of folding chairs. The maintenance crew clustered together toward the back, but Daniel deliberately separated himself, finding a seat near the side wall. He wanted a clear view without being noticed. The room filled quickly, over 200 people probably, representing every division of the company. Daniel spotted his supervisor Tom sitting with other department heads in the third row. Everyone wore expressions ranging from curious to nervous. Corporate restructuring made people anxious. At precisely 2 o'clock, a woman walked onto the small raised platform at the front of the room. Elena. She wore a black suit that somehow managed to look both severely professional and elegantly understated. Her dark hair was pulled back in a flawless style, and her expression radiated calm confidence. This was a different version of Elena than the one who'd stood beside a broken car on Thursday night. This was the CEO. "Thank you all for being here," Elena began, and her voice carried clearly through the room without need for a microphone. "I know there's been speculation over the past few weeks about changes in company leadership, so I wanted to address everyone directly." She moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to command, and Daniel found himself studying her with new eyes. How had he not seen it before? The way she'd watched him work, not with casual curiosity, but with the analytical attention of someone evaluating systems and processes. The questions about how long he'd been with the company, whether he liked his job, even her car breaking down in the company parking lot at 8 p.m. on a Thursday. She'd been working late, studying operations, gathering intelligence. "My name is Elena Navarro," she continued. 6 months ago, my investment group acquired majority ownership of this company. Since then, I've been conducting a comprehensive evaluation of our operations, not from a corporate office, but here, in person, observing how the company actually functions. Murmurs rippled through the room. "I know that might seem unusual," Elena said with a slight smile, "but I've learned that the best way to understand an organization is to see it as employees see it, to understand the real challenges and opportunities that don't appear in quarterly reports." Her eyes swept across the room, and for just a moment, less than a second, they found Daniel's, then moved on, as if he were just another face in the crowd. "Effective immediately, I'll be assuming the role of CEO," Elena continued. "My goal is straightforward, to build this company into an industry leader by focusing on operational excellence, employee development, and sustainable growth. That means changes, some of them significant, but it also means opportunities." She went on to outline her vision with the kind of clear, structured thinking that probably impressed the hell out of the business school graduates in the room. Daniel only half listened. He was too busy trying to reconcile this composed executive with the exhausted woman who'd stood in a parking lot and whispered words that had nothing to do with operational excellence. I wish you were mine. What had she meant? What did it mean now? The meeting lasted 30 minutes. Elena fielded questions with practiced ease, outlining her restructuring plans without revealing enough to cause panic. By the time she dismissed everyone, Daniel had learned exactly what he'd already suspected. Elena Navarro was brilliant, strategic, and completely in control. Everything about her Thursday night confession had been an aberration, a moment of weakness that she clearly regretted. Daniel stood to leave with everyone else, but before he reached the door, a voice called out, "Mr. Brooks?" He turned to find Margaret Caldwell, the company's regional director and apparently one of the few executives who'd known Elena's true identity, gesturing toward him. "Could you stay behind for a moment?" Every eye in the maintenance crew turned toward Daniel. He could feel their curiosity, their speculation about why he was being singled out. "Sure," he said quietly. The room emptied slowly, employees filing out in clusters of whispered conversation. Marcus shot Daniel a look that clearly said, "What the hell did you do?" Daniel had no answer. When the last person left, only 3 people remained: Daniel, Margaret, and Elena, who stood near the platform looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. Margaret folded her hands and studied both of them with the expression of someone deeply amused by a situation she'd helped create. "I thought the 3 of us should have a conversation," Margaret said, "about honesty." The silence in the empty assembly area felt like pressure against Daniel's eardrums. Margaret Caldwell stood between him and the exit with the calm assurance of someone who'd orchestrated this exact moment. Elena remained near the platform, her posture rigid, eyes fixed on some point beyond Daniel's shoulder. "Honesty," Daniel repeated slowly. "About what?" Margaret smiled, a knowing expression that suggested she'd been watching the situation develop long before Thursday night. About the fact that Elena Navarro didn't just happen to be stranded in that parking lot with a conveniently broken alternator belt. Daniel's brain stuttered. "What?" "The belt was fine 2 days earlier," Margaret said. "I know because I reviewed the maintenance logs myself this morning. That car had a full inspection on Tuesday. Every system checked out perfectly." Elena's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she still didn't look at Daniel. "Are you saying—" Daniel tried to process what he was hearing. "Are you saying she sabotaged her own car?" "I'm saying that Elena has been observing this company very carefully for weeks, studying how different divisions operate, how employees interact, what the real culture looks like beneath the corporate veneer. And somewhere during that process, she became interested in understanding one particular employee more closely. The implication landed like a physical blow. Elena finally spoke, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Margaret, this isn't what? Isn't relevant to your ability to lead this company?" Margaret's tone remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. "Or isn't something Daniel deserves to know before we all pretend Thursday night was a random accident?" Daniel felt like the floor had shifted beneath him. "You broke your own car to talk to me." Elena's eyes finally met his, and the raw honesty in them was almost worse than the deception. "The alternator belt was wearing out. I just accelerated the timeline." "Jesus Christ. I know how it sounds. Do you?" Daniel's voice came out harder than he intended. "Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like the CEO of this company manipulated a situation to approach an employee under false pretenses. It sounds like the kind of thing that gets people fired or sued." You're right," Elena said quietly. "It was wrong. I knew it was wrong when I did it. Then why? Because I needed to know if what I'd been observing was real." Elena's professional composure was cracking now, revealing something raw underneath. "I've spent 6 weeks watching how this company operates, sitting in on meetings, reviewing processes, observing how people interact when they don't know they're being evaluated. And you—" She stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "You were different." "Different how?" "You cared." Elena's voice carried a strange mixture of frustration and wonder. "Not about impressing management or positioning yourself for advancement. You just did the work correctly, because that's who you are. I watched you spend 40 minutes calibrating a sensor that 90% of mechanics would have replaced. I saw you stay late 3 nights in a row to mentor the new apprentice, even though you weren't getting paid overtime. You were real in a company full of people performing their jobs. Daniel tried to find anger in what she was describing, but the emotion wouldn't come. Instead, he felt something closer to vertigo, like discovering the ground he'd been standing on was actually water. So you decided to, what? Test me? See if I'd help a stranger? I decided to meet you as a person instead of as the CEO. Elena's hands had curled into fists at her sides. I wanted one honest conversation with someone who wasn't trying to impress me, or manipulate me, or position themselves strategically. And yes, I manufactured the opportunity. I'm not proud of it. Margaret had been watching this exchange with the focus of a referee at a boxing match. Now she stepped forward slightly, commanding attention. Here's what I know, Margaret said. Elena came to me 3 weeks ago and asked for Daniel Brooks' employment file. Wanted to understand his background, his performance reviews, whether there were any disciplinary issues. I asked why she was interested in a maintenance mechanic, and she told me she was considering restructuring the operations division and wanted to identify potential leadership. That wasn't entirely untrue, Elena interjected. But it wasn't entirely true either, Margaret continued, because what Elena was really trying to understand was whether her instinct about Daniel's character was accurate, whether the person she'd been observing matched the person in the official records. Daniel looked between the two women, trying to map the shape of what they were describing. You've been planning this for weeks. Not planning, Elena corrected, trying to talk myself out of it, reminding myself of every reason why pursuing any kind of personal connection with an employee was professionally disastrous. And then Thursday night, I was sitting in my car in that parking lot, knowing you'd be leaving work soon, and I thought, her voice caught slightly, I thought if I just talked to you once, as equals, maybe I could get past whatever this was. Prove to myself it was just curiosity about an employee who seemed genuinely decent. And instead you told me you wished I was yours. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Elena's composure finally shattered completely. I know how that must have sounded, how it sounds now, knowing who I really am. But Daniel, she took a step toward him, then seemed to think better of it. That wasn't strategy. That wasn't manipulation. That was the truest thing I've said in 6 months. Daniel's heart was pounding now, his emotions cycling through anger and confusion, and something he didn't want to name. Why are you telling me this? Why not just let me think it was a coincidence and move on? Because Margaret is right, Elena said. You deserve honesty. And because, she glanced at Margaret, who nodded encouragingly. Because I need you to understand something about why I'm really here. Margaret moved toward the door. I'm going to give you two some privacy. But Elena, remember what we discussed. No more half-truths. After Margaret left, the assembly area felt cavernous and exposed. Daniel could hear the hum of ventilation systems, the distant sound of machinery from the manufacturing floor, the quiet thunder of his own pulse. Elena walked to one of the folding chairs and sat down heavily, like her legs had simply stopped supporting her. The powerful CEO from the platform had disappeared, leaving someone who looked exhausted and uncertain. Can you sit? She asked. Please? I can't do this with you standing there like you're about to bolt. Daniel considered walking out. Should have walked out. Instead, he pulled a chair from the row behind her and sat down, maintaining careful distance. I'm engaged, Elena said abruptly. Of all the things Daniel had been preparing to hear, that wasn't one of them. What? I'm engaged, have been for 4 months, to a man named Victor Hale. His family owns a venture capital firm that helped finance the acquisition of this company. Our engagement was, she searched for the right word, strategically beneficial for both families, for the business partnerships it solidified. Daniel felt something cold spreading through his chest. Does he know you're here? Telling a mechanic you wish he was yours? Victor knows I'm here restructuring the company. He doesn't know about Thursday night. Doesn't know about... Elena made a helpless gesture. Any of this. So on top of everything else, you're cheating on your fiancé. No. Elena's response was immediate and sharp. I haven't cheated on anyone. I haven't done anything except have one conversation in a parking lot and say something I shouldn't have said. You sabotaged your car to manufacture that conversation. I loosened an alternator belt that was already wearing out. I didn't fabricate feelings out of nothing. Elena's voice carried a desperate edge now. Look, I'm not trying to justify what I did. I'm trying to explain why I did it. Why a woman who has built her entire life around strategic thinking and careful planning would do something so completely irrational. I'm listening, Daniel said, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear it. Elena stood and began pacing, small, controlled movements that suggested she was trying to contain energy that wanted to explode outward. When I was 25, I married my college boyfriend. Everyone said we were perfect together. Same educational background, same career ambitions, same 5-year plan. We bought a beautiful house in the right neighborhood and hosted dinner parties with the right people and said the right things about wanting children eventually. Daniel stayed silent, watching her pace. He left me 2 years later for his yoga instructor, a woman who dropped out of college to travel through Southeast Asia and who made ceramic bowls for farmers markets. And you know what he said when he told me he was leaving? Elena stopped pacing and looked directly at Daniel. He said he'd never felt like a real person around me, that our entire marriage had been a performance of what we were supposed to want instead of what we actually wanted. I'm sorry, Daniel said, meaning it. Don't be. He was right. Elena's laugh was bitter. I spent 2 years performing the role of perfect wife without ever asking myself if I actually wanted that life. And after the divorce, I told myself I'd learned my lesson. No more pretending. No more building a life around what looked good on paper. But then you got engaged again, to someone strategically beneficial. Yes. Elena sat back down, this time in the chair directly next to Daniel's, close enough that he could see the fine lines of stress around her eyes. Because somewhere between the divorce and now, I convinced myself that the problem wasn't performing a role. It was performing the wrong role. That if I could just be successful enough, powerful enough, in control enough, then maybe I'd finally feel something. Anything other than this constant exhaustion of pretending my life is what I want it to be. Daniel understood that feeling better than he wanted to admit. And then you saw me calibrating a sensor. And then I saw you calibrating a sensor, Elena confirmed with a sad smile. And mentoring an apprentice. And staying late to finish work correctly, even though no one would have noticed if you'd cut corners. And I thought, what would it be like to be that honest? To just do the thing in front of you because it's the right thing to do, without calculating 5 moves ahead or worrying about how it positions you strategically. You're romanticizing my life, Daniel said quietly. I'm not some noble working-class hero. I do my job because I have a daughter who needs stability and health insurance. I know, that's what makes it real. Elena turned to face him fully. You're not pretending to be decent. You're just decent, and being around you for 20 minutes felt like the first honest interaction I've had in 6 months. The confession sat between them, vulnerable and dangerous. Daniel knew he should stand up, walk out, report this entire conversation to HR, and let the corporate machinery handle whatever this was. But instead, he heard himself ask the question that had been burning in his mind since Thursday night. What did you mean? When you said you wished I was yours? Elena closed her eyes briefly. I meant exactly what it sounded like. I meant that sitting there watching you work, I suddenly understood what I'd been missing my entire adult life. Not romance or passion or any of the things people write about in greeting cards. Just someone who sees the world the way you do. Someone who cares about doing things right instead of doing things that look impressive. Someone... Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Someone real. Daniel's throat felt tight. Elena, I know it's impossible, she continued quickly. I know every reason why this can't happen. I'm your boss. I'm engaged to someone else. I manipulated a situation to talk to you. I violated probably a dozen company policies and ethical guidelines. But I needed you to know that Thursday night wasn't some executive playing games with an employee. It was just a person being honest for once in her life. The ventilation system hummed in the silence that followed. Daniel thought about his carefully controlled life, the routines he'd built, the stability he'd created for Lily, the walls he'd constructed to keep himself from wanting anything more than what he had. Safe, predictable, manageable. And then he thought about 4 whispered words that had torn through all of it like lightning through darkness. I don't know what you want from me, he said finally. Nothing, Elena said, and she sounded like she meant it. I don't want anything from you, Daniel. I just needed you to understand that what happened Thursday night was real. That I wasn't toying with you or manipulating you or doing any of the things you probably think I was doing. I was just, she made a helpless gesture. I was just being honest, maybe for the first time in my entire life. Daniel stood up, his body demanding movement even though his mind was still trying to process everything he'd heard. He walked a few steps away, then turned back to face her. "This can't happen," he said. "Whatever this is, it can't happen." "I know. You're the CEO. I'm a mechanic. You're engaged to someone else. I have a daughter who depends on me keeping this job." "I know," Elena repeated. "And even if none of that was true, even if we were just two random people who met in a parking lot, you're trying to escape from a life you don't want. That's not the same thing as wanting the life I have." Elena flinched slightly at that, and Daniel knew he'd hit something true. "You're right," she said quietly. "You're probably right about all of it. So we move on. You run your company, I fix your trucks, and we pretend Thursday night never happened. Is that what you want?" The question should have been easy to answer, should have been obvious, but Daniel found himself hesitating, and in that hesitation, Elena saw everything she needed to see. "It's what has to happen," Daniel said instead. Elena nodded slowly and stood up. The professional mask was sliding back into place now, rebuilding the walls that had briefly come down. "Then that's what we'll do." She walked toward the door, and Daniel knew this was the moment, the clean break, the return to normal life, the end of whatever impossible thing had sparked between them. But before she reached the exit, Elena paused and looked back. "For what it's worth," she said, "Thursday night, those 20 minutes in the parking lot, that was the most honest I've felt in 10 years. So thank you for that, if nothing else." Then she was gone, and Daniel was alone in the empty assembly area with the echo of her words and the wreckage of his carefully controlled life. He sat back down in the folding chair and put his head in his hands. The smart thing, the responsible thing, was to let this end here. To go back to his routine, his daughter, his simple existence where the biggest stress was a stubborn transmission and the biggest joy was Lily scoring a soccer goal. But part of him kept replaying Elena's voice when she'd said those 4 words Thursday night. "I wish you were mine." And the terrible truth was that some part of him, buried deep beneath the responsibility and the caution and the determination to never risk the stability he'd built, wished the same thing. Daniel pulled out his phone and stared at the screen for a long moment before typing a message to his supervisor. "Need to take personal time tomorrow. Family matter." Tom responded within seconds. "Everything okay with Lily?" "She's fine. Just need to think some things through." "Take the time you need." Daniel put the phone away and stood up. The assembly area felt too large, too empty, echoing with conversations that shouldn't have happened and confessions that couldn't be taken back. He walked out into the late afternoon sunlight, climbed into his truck, and drove home to his daughter. But all the way there, he couldn't stop thinking about a woman who'd sabotaged her own car just to have one honest conversation. The next morning, Daniel kept Lily home from school, something he'd never done without a legitimate reason before. She was thrilled at first, thinking it was some kind of surprise adventure, but her excitement dimmed when she realized they were just staying in the apartment. "Are you sick?" she asked, studying him with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "No, just needed a day." Needed a day for what? For thinking. Lily considered this seriously. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel looked at his daughter, 7 years old, growing up in a world he'd carefully constructed to be safe and stable and entirely predictable. She deserved better than a father who was secretly unraveling over a woman he'd known for 20 minutes. "Nothing important," he lied. "Just work stuff." They spent the morning playing board games and reading together, Lily curled up against his side on the couch with the comfortable ease of a child who absolutely trusted her parent. Daniel tried to focus on the story he was reading aloud, but his mind kept drifting. Elena was engaged. That fact should have made everything simpler, should have created a clear boundary that made this entire situation impossible to pursue even in theory. But somehow it made everything more complicated. Because if Elena was willing to sabotage her car, violate professional ethics, and confess feelings to someone she barely knew, all while engaged to someone else, that meant she was desperate, drowning in a life she'd built but didn't want. Daniel recognized that desperation. He'd felt it himself after Sarah died, when well-meaning relatives kept telling him he needed to start dating again, needed to give Lily a mother figure, needed to move on with his life. As if he could just replace one person with another like swapping out a faulty part. He'd built his walls to keep that pressure out, to protect the small, simple life he'd created. But what if those walls had also locked him in? "Dad?" Lily's voice pulled him back to the present. "Yeah?" "You stopped reading." "Sorry." Daniel found his place on the page and continued, but Lily was watching him now instead of listening to the story. "Are you sad?" she asked. "No, kiddo, just distracted." "About what?" "How did you explain to a 7-year-old that her father had accidentally developed feelings for the CEO of his company who was engaged to someone else and who'd manipulated their first meeting?" "You didn't. You protected her from adult complications and kept her world stable." "Just boring grown-up stuff," Daniel said. "Nothing for you to worry about." But Lily's expression suggested she was worrying anyway. They ate lunch together, grilled cheese sandwiches that Daniel burned slightly because he wasn't paying attention. Lily ate hers without complaint, watching him with that careful attention that made him feel simultaneously loved and transparent. "Mom used to make them better," she said finally. Daniel looked up, surprised. Lily rarely mentioned Sarah unprompted. "Yeah, she did." "Do you miss her?" "Every day." "Me too." Lily picked at her sandwich crust. "But I don't remember her as much anymore. Is that bad?" Daniel felt his chest tighten. "No, sweetheart. That's not bad. You were really young when she got sick. Do you think she'd be mad? That I'm forgetting?" "No." Daniel reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "She'd want you to be happy, to have a good life, not to spend all your time being sad about things you can't change." Lily nodded slowly, processing this with the seriousness she brought to everything. "Okay." They finished lunch in comfortable silence, and Daniel felt some of the tension in his chest ease slightly. This, his daughter, their quiet routine, the simple rhythm of their shared life, this was what mattered, not complicated feelings for a woman who lived in a different world. But that afternoon, while Lily was absorbed in building an elaborate Lego city on the living room floor, Daniel's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "This is Margaret Caldwell. We need to talk. Can you meet me tomorrow? There's something you should know about Elena's situation." Daniel stared at the message for a long moment before responding. "Why are you involving yourself in this?" The reply came quickly. "Because I've known Elena for 15 years. And I've never seen her care about anything the way she cares about figuring out whatever this is with you. She won't pursue it because she's too ethical. But you deserve to know what you're actually walking away from. I have to work tomorrow. Lunch break. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks from your facility. I'll buy." Daniel knew he should decline, should delete the message and block the number and commit fully to moving on. Instead, he typed 12:30. Margaret's response was just a thumbs-up emoji. Daniel set the phone down and looked at his daughter, still absorbed in her Lego construction. She was building something elaborate, a castle maybe, or a space station, something ambitious that required careful planning and patience. "That's looking good," he said. Lily glanced up and beamed. "It's a fortress, with secret tunnels and escape routes in case of dragon attacks. Very practical." "Dad?" Lily's expression turned serious again. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "If you met someone who made you happy, like really happy, would you be allowed to like them, even if Mom isn't here anymore?" The question hit Daniel like a physical blow. He knelt down next to Lily's Lego fortress, trying to find the right words. "Where's this coming from?" "Mrs. Chen said her friend Rosa is going on dates now, even though her husband died 3 years ago, and Mrs. Chen said it's okay because Rosa has to live her life." Lily was arranging Lego bricks with careful precision, not looking at him. "Is it okay? To live your life even when someone you love isn't there anymore?" Daniel felt something shift in his chest, a wall he'd been maintaining without even realizing it. "Yeah, kiddo, it's okay. It's more than okay. So if you met someone, you could like them?" "Theoretically, yes." "Did you meet someone?" The question was too sharp, too knowing. Daniel wondered how much Lily had picked up from his strange mood over the past few days. "I met someone who's complicated," he said honestly. Someone who I probably shouldn't like, but kind of do anyway. Lily finally looked up from her Legos, studying his face with those observant eyes. Is she nice? I think so, but I don't really know her very well. Then maybe you should get to know her before you decide if she's too complicated. Lily returned to her construction, apparently satisfied with this logic. That's what Mom always said about new things. Don't decide until you actually try. Daniel sat back on his heels, looking at his daughter with a mixture of pride and wonder. When had she gotten so wise? That's pretty good advice, he said. I know. Lily added another tower to her fortress. I'm very smart. Very humble, too. She grinned at him, and for a moment everything felt simple and clear, but Daniel knew simplicity was an illusion. By tomorrow afternoon, after meeting with Margaret, everything would probably become more complicated than ever. That night, after Lily was asleep, Daniel stood in her doorway, watching her breathe with the same ritual attention he'd practiced since she was born. 7 years of this, checking to make sure she was safe, warm, peacefully dreaming. 7 years of building a life around her needs and pretending his own didn't matter. Except, they did matter. Elena had been right about that much. Daniel had been performing his own role. The dedicated single dad, the reliable mechanic, the man who didn't want or need anything beyond the simple stability he'd created. But what if that was just another kind of pretending? His phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. One more thing to consider before tomorrow. Elena ended things with Victor tonight, called off the engagement, told him she couldn't marry someone she didn't love just because it made strategic sense. Daniel read the message 3 times. Why are you telling me this? He typed back. Because she won't. Because she thinks telling you would be manipulative, like she's trying to clear obstacles to pursue something with you. But you should know that her decision had nothing to do with you. She's been trying to find the courage to end it for months. You just helped her see that she deserved better than a life built on strategic convenience. That doesn't change anything. She's still my boss. No, she's still the CEO of a company where you happen to work. There's a difference. But I'll let you think about that overnight. See you tomorrow. Daniel set the phone down and walked to the kitchen, where he poured himself a whiskey he didn't really want, and stared out the window at the parking lot below. Elena had called off her engagement. The information felt too large to process, dangerous and promising in equal measure. Part of him wanted to call her to say, "What? Congratulations on your life-altering decision? Thanks for complicating mine even further?" But Margaret was right. If Elena had wanted him to know, she would have told him herself. The fact that she hadn't said anything meant she was trying to give him space, trying not to manipulate the situation any more than she already had, which somehow made the whole thing worse. Daniel finished his whiskey and went to bed, but sleep was a long time coming. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Daniel went through his morning routine on autopilot, getting Lily ready for school, making breakfast, handling the drop-off with forced cheerfulness. At work, he threw himself into repairs with an intensity that made Marcus comment. You trying to set a new speed record or something? Just focused, Daniel said shortly. Uh-huh. Marcus studied him carefully. You know you can talk to me, right? If something's going on? Nothing's going on. Right, and I'm the Queen of England. But Marcus dropped it, returning to his own work and leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts. At 12:15, Daniel cleaned up and headed for the coffee shop Margaret had mentioned. It was a small place, locally owned, with mismatched furniture and the kind of earnest decor that suggested the owner really cared about creating community space. Margaret was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. She gestured Daniel over. Black, 2 sugars, she said, pushing 1 cup toward him. That's your usual, right? How did you... Daniel stopped. Corporate consultant, you know everything. Regional director, Margaret corrected with a smile. And I pay attention. It's kind of my job. Daniel sat down and took a sip of coffee. It was exactly right. Okay, you wanted to talk. I'm here. Margaret leaned back in her chair, studying him with the same focused attention she'd shown in the assembly room. How much do you know about Elena's background? Just what she told me yesterday. The divorce, the engagement she just ended, the fact that she's apparently been watching me for weeks like some kind of corporate stalker. That's the abbreviated version. Margaret pulled out her phone and scrolled through something before turning the screen toward Daniel. It showed a news article from 5 years earlier. Navarro Investment Group announces new leadership. The photo showed a younger Elena standing with an older man who shared her features, her father, presumably. Both wore professional smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Elena's family has been in private equity for 3 generations, Margaret explained. Her grandfather built the foundation. Her father expanded it into a billion-dollar operation. Elena was groomed from childhood to take over eventually. Every school she attended, every internship she held, every connection she made, all of it was strategic positioning. Sounds exhausting, Daniel said. It was. Is. Elena once told me she had her first business meeting when she was 14, sat in on an acquisition negotiation so she could learn how real power works. That was a direct quote from her father. Daniel thought about Lily at 7, worried about Lego fortresses and dragon attacks. The idea of putting her in a corporate boardroom seemed almost cruel. She never had a choice, he said quietly. Not really. And for a long time she convinced herself that was fine, that she wanted the same things her family wanted for her. The divorce shook that belief a little, but not enough to change course. Margaret took a sip of her coffee. Then 6 months ago, her father had a stroke. Survived, but it forced him into retirement. Suddenly, Elena was running everything, and she realized she had no idea if she even wanted the life she'd been working toward her entire existence. So she bought this company. She bought this company as a kind of test, a mid-sized logistics operation, completely outside her family's usual portfolio. Her father thought it was a waste of time, too small, too unsexy, not strategic enough. But Elena saw it as an opportunity to build something that was entirely hers. Not her father's vision or her family's legacy. Just hers. Daniel was beginning to understand. And then she met a mechanic who didn't know who she was. Margaret confirmed. Someone who treated her like a regular person instead of Elena Navarro, billion-dollar heiress. Someone who just wanted to help because helping was the right thing to do. I jumped her car battery. I didn't perform a miracle. You showed her kindness without expecting anything in return. Do you have any idea how rare that is in Elena's world? Margaret's expression softened. Everyone in her life wants something from her. Business partnerships, investment capital, strategic connections, social access. Every conversation is a negotiation. Every relationship is transactional. And then there's you, a guy who spent 20 minutes fixing her car and didn't even ask her name until the job was done. Daniel sat with that for a moment, watching steam rise from his coffee cup. That still doesn't change the fundamental problem. She's the CEO. I'm an employee. Even if we both wanted to pursue this, which I'm not saying we do, it's an ethics violation, a power imbalance, the kind of thing that ends careers. Only if it's mishandled, Margaret said. But yes, it's complicated, which is why Elena won't pursue it. She's too ethical, too aware of the potential for abuse. She'd rather be miserable than risk putting you in an uncomfortable position. Then why are you telling me all this? Because someone needs to. Margaret leaned forward, her expression intense now. Elena won't fight for what she wants. She spent 36 years being told that her personal desires are less important than strategic positioning. But you're different. You build your life around what matters to you, your daughter, your integrity, your work. So I'm asking you, does this matter? The question hung between them, demanding honesty. Daniel thought about Thursday night, about 4 whispered words and the raw vulnerability in Elena's eyes, about the way she'd looked at him like he represented some kind of escape from a life she'd never chosen. He thought about yesterday's conversation in the empty assembly room, the careful way she'd explained everything, taking responsibility for her manipulation while simultaneously being more honest than most people managed in a lifetime. And he thought about the message last night. Elena ending her engagement not because of him, but because she'd finally found the courage to stop pretending. I don't know, he said honestly. I barely know her. What I do know is that she's brilliant and powerful and living in a completely different world than mine, that she made some questionable choices to engineer our first meeting, that pursuing anything with her would be professionally risky and personally complicated and probably a disaster. But, Margaret prompted, But those 20 minutes in the parking lot felt more real than anything has in years. Daniel surprised himself with the admission, and I can't stop thinking about what she said, about wishing I was hers. Margaret smiled, satisfied, like she'd just won a negotiation. Then maybe you should tell her that. And say what? Hey, I know you're my boss and you manipulated our meeting and this is ethically questionable, but want to grab dinner anyway? Or you could start with something simpler, like, I'd like to get to know you better. Margaret finished her coffee and stood up. Look, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just saying that Elena Navarro has spent her entire life doing what's expected instead of what she wants. And you have the opportunity to show her that sometimes the right choice is the one that doesn't make strategic sense. She left money on the table for both coffees and walked toward the door. But before leaving, she turned back. One more thing. Elena asked me not to talk to you about any of this. She was very clear that she didn't want me pressuring you or making you feel obligated in any way. So if you decide to walk away, she'll respect that decision completely. Margaret paused. But I've watched her sacrifice what she wants for what makes sense too many times. So I'm hoping you'll at least consider the possibility that sometimes the complicated choice is the right one. Then she was gone, and Daniel was alone with his coffee and the weight of a decision he wasn't ready to make. Daniel sat in the coffee shop for another 20 minutes after Margaret left, watching the lunch crowd thin out as office workers returned to their desks and their carefully compartmentalized lives. His own coffee had gone cold, but he kept holding the cup anyway, needing something solid to anchor him while his thoughts spiraled. The smart choice was obvious. Walk away. Maintain professional boundaries. Protect the stable life he'd built for Lily. But Margaret's words kept echoing in his mind. Sometimes the complicated choice is the right one. When Daniel finally stood to leave, he'd made a decision. Not the decision, not yet, but a first step. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to the number he'd saved as Elena, CEO. We should talk. Properly this time. No corporate offices, no manufactured car troubles. Just honest conversation. He hit send before he could second-guess himself, then walked back toward work with his heart pounding against his ribs like it was trying to escape. The response came faster than he expected. When? Daniel checked his watch. 2 hours left in his shift, then he'd need to pick up Lily from school. His evenings were sacred. Homework, dinner, bedtime routine. The architecture of their life together. But Mrs. Chen owed him a favor from last month when he'd fixed her kitchen sink. Tonight, 7 o'clock, there's a park near my apartment. Quiet this time of year. I'll be there. No hesitation, no questions about whether this was appropriate or professionally risky. Just simple agreement that felt like stepping off a cliff together. Daniel spent the rest of his shift in a state of controlled anxiety, his hands performing familiar tasks while his mind ran through 1,000 different versions of the conversation ahead. What would he even say? What did he want from this? Marcus noticed, of course. You're rewiring that harness backwards. Daniel looked down and realized Marcus was right. He'd been so distracted he'd reversed the polarity. Shit. Yeah, shit. Marcus leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. You want to tell me what's going on? Because I've worked with you for 6 years and I've never seen you this rattled. Just personal stuff. The new CEO kind of personal stuff? Daniel's head snapped up. What? Come on, man. Everyone saw you get pulled aside after the big announcement, and word is Margaret Caldwell has been making inquiries about your employment history. Marcus's expression was more concerned than judgmental. People are talking. People should mind their own business. Probably, but they won't. Marcus grabbed a tool and started helping Daniel fix the wiring mistake. Look, I don't know what's happening between you and the Ice Queen upstairs. Don't call her that. The sharpness in Daniel's voice made Marcus pause. Okay, the CEO, whatever. Point is, you're walking into dangerous territory. Power dynamics, corporate politics, all that HR nightmare stuff. Just be careful. I'm always careful. Yeah, that's what worries me. Careful people don't usually get called into private meetings with billion-dollar executives. Marcus finished the last connection and straightened up. But for what it's worth, I hope whatever you're doing works out. You've been going through the motions for a long time. Maybe it's time you actually lived a little. The casual observation hit harder than it should have. Daniel wanted to argue, to insist he wasn't just going through motions, but the words stuck in his throat, because Marcus was right. At 5 o'clock, Daniel left work and drove straight to Mrs. Chen's apartment. His neighbor was delighted to watch Lily for a few hours, waving away his explanations about where he was going with the knowing smile of someone who'd lived long enough to recognize the signs of a man about to do something either very brave or very stupid. "Take your time," Mrs. Chen said. "And Daniel, wear the blue shirt. It brings out your eyes." Daniel went home and changed into the blue shirt. By 6:45, he was pacing the small park 3 blocks from his apartment, watching the sun sink toward the horizon and turning the sky shades of orange and purple that felt too dramatic for the moment. This wasn't some romantic comedy. This was 2 people trying to figure out if the thing sparking between them was real or just the attractive illusion of escape. Elena arrived exactly at 7, walking across the grass in jeans and a simple sweater that made her look younger and more vulnerable than the corporate armor she'd worn at the company meeting. Her hair was down, catching the last of the daylight, and Daniel noticed for the first time that she looked tired, not just physically, but in some deeper way that sleep couldn't fix. "Hi," she said, stopping a few feet away like she wasn't sure if coming closer was allowed. "Hi." Daniel gestured toward a bench near the playground. "Want to sit?" They walked over in silence, the only sounds their footsteps on the path and the distant traffic from the main road. When they sat down, Elena maintained careful distance between them, and Daniel noticed she was gripping her hands together tightly enough that her knuckles had gone white. "I heard you ended your engagement," Daniel said, deciding to start with honesty since that seemed to be the theme. Elena closed her eyes briefly. "Margaret told you." "Yeah. I asked her not to." "She did it anyway. Apparently she's very invested in whatever this is." "This," Elena repeated softly, like she was testing the weight of the word. "What is this, Daniel?" "I was hoping you could tell me." Elena laughed, a quiet, almost sad sound. "I sabotaged my car to manufacture a meeting with an employee I'd been observing for weeks. I confessed feelings I barely understand to someone I've known for less than an hour total. I ended an engagement that was supposed to secure my family's business interests. And now I'm sitting in a public park, about to have a conversation that could destroy both our careers." She turned to look at him directly. "I have no idea what this is, but it scares the hell out of me." "Good," Daniel said, "because it scares me too." The admission seemed to ease something in Elena's expression. She relaxed slightly, her shoulders dropping from their defensive position. "Margaret said you wanted to talk properly. What does that mean?" "It means I want to understand what's actually happening here. Not the version where you're my boss or I'm an employee or we're worried about corporate policies. Just, what is this thing between us?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, watching a pair of birds fight over a discarded sandwich wrapper near the swings. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful, like she was picking her way through a minefield. "Do you believe in recognition?" she asked. "What kind of recognition? The kind where you meet someone and some part of you just knows them already. Not logically, not based on shared history or common interests. Just this bone-deep certainty that you found something you didn't even know you were looking for." Daniel thought about 20 minutes in a parking lot, about the comfortable silence and the way Elena had watched him work, about 4 whispered words that had torn through his carefully constructed defenses. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I believe in that. That's what happened to me when I saw you." Elena's voice carried a mixture of wonder and frustration. "I was standing in a conference room listening to your supervisor talk about your performance metrics, and I happened to glance out the window. You were in the maintenance bay working on some diagnostic issue, and you had this expression of complete focus, like the only thing that existed in the entire world was solving that one problem correctly. That's just how I work." "I know, that's what struck me." Elena turned on the bench to face him more fully. "Everyone else I deal with, they're always performing, always aware of who's watching, who might notice, how their actions will be perceived. But you were just present, completely absorbed in the work itself. And I thought, when was the last time I felt that way about anything? So you started watching me." "Like a creep." "Yes." Elena's smile was self-deprecating. "I told myself I was evaluating potential leadership candidates, that I was studying operational efficiency. but really I was trying to understand what it felt like to be that honest with yourself. Daniel absorbed this, trying to reconcile the image of the powerful CEO studying him through office windows with the exhausted woman sitting beside him now. And the parking lot. Was me finally admitting that observation wasn't enough, that I needed to actually talk to you, to see if the person I'd been watching matched the person I'd built up in my head. Elena's hands were still clasped tightly together. I told myself I'd have one conversation, prove that you were just a regular guy doing a regular job, and then I could move on. Stop obsessing over someone I didn't even know. But that's not what happened. No. What happened was 20 minutes of the most genuine human connection I've experienced in years, and then I opened my mouth and destroyed it by saying something I had no right to say. Daniel reached over and gently pulled her hands apart before she could cut off her own circulation. The touch was electric, simple skin contact that somehow felt profoundly intimate. Elena looked down at their hands, then back up at his face, and Daniel saw something in her eyes that matched what he was feeling. Fear. Hope. The terrible recognition that this thing between them was real. You had every right to say it, Daniel said quietly. Just like I have every right to tell you that I haven't stopped thinking about those words since you said them. Elena's breath caught slightly. Daniel, let me finish. He was still holding her hands, and neither of them moved to break the connection. I've spent 7 years building a life that's completely controlled, predictable, safe. Everything scheduled, everything planned, no room for chaos or surprise, or anything that might destabilize what I've created for Lily. And it's a good life, it really is. But it's also suffocating, Elena offered quietly. Yeah, suffocating. Daniel had never admitted that out loud before, not even to himself. And then you showed up in a parking lot and said 4 words that made me realize I've been pretending too. Pretending that being responsible is the same thing as being alive. We're a pair, aren't we? Elena's voice carried bitter amusement. The CEO who doesn't want to be CEO, and the single dad who's forgotten how to want anything for himself. Sounds like the setup for a terrible romantic comedy. Or a tragedy. Maybe both. They sat there in the gathering darkness, hands still touching, and Daniel felt the moment crystallizing into something that would define everything that came after. This was the choice point, the place where they either walked away from whatever this was, or stepped forward into all the beautiful, terrifying complications it promised. I don't know how this works, Elena said finally. The logistics of it, the ethics, how we navigate the fact that I own the company where you work without turning this into exactly the kind of power imbalance nightmare that ruins lives. We figure it out as we go. That's not very strategic. No, Daniel agreed. It's not. But maybe that's the point. Elena pulled one hand free and pressed it against her face, and Daniel realized she was fighting tears. I'm so tired of being strategic. I'm so tired of calculating 5 moves ahead and optimizing outcomes and making decisions based on what strengthens my position. I just want... Her voice broke slightly. I just want to feel something real. Daniel pulled her against him, and Elena came willingly, pressing her face against his shoulder while her carefully maintained composure finally shattered. She didn't sob or make noise, but he could feel the tremors running through her body, could feel the dampness of tears soaking through his shirt. He held her while she cried, one hand stroking her hair, and thought about all the reasons this was a terrible idea. She was his boss. The power dynamics were genuinely problematic. People would talk, would assume the worst, would make their relationship into office gossip and HR investigations. Elena would face accusations of favoritism or misconduct. Daniel would be seen as opportunistic, sleeping his way up the corporate ladder. And underneath all of that was the harder truth. They barely knew each other. This intense connection might be nothing more than 2 lonely people recognizing their own pain in someone else's eyes. But sitting there in the dark with Elena crying against his shoulder, none of those rational concerns seemed to matter as much as the simple fact that holding her felt right in a way nothing had felt right in years. Eventually, Elena's breathing steadied, and she pulled back, wiping her eyes with the heel of her hand. I'm sorry. I don't usually fall apart on people. You're allowed to fall apart sometimes. Not really, not in my world. She managed a watery smile. CEOs who cry in public parks aren't taken seriously. Good thing I'm not taking you seriously then. That surprised a real laugh out of her. You're not? Not even a little bit. I'm just sitting here with a woman who's had a rough few days. The fact that she happens to run a company is completely irrelevant. Elena studied his face in the dim light from the distant street lamps. How do you do that? Do what? Make it all seem so simple, like we're just two people instead of a tangled mess of complications and consequences. Because right now, we are just two people. Everything else, the job, the policies, the optics, we can figure that out tomorrow. Tonight, let's just be honest about what we want. What do you want, Daniel? The question hung between them, demanding truth. Daniel thought about the safe answer, the responsible answer, the answer that protected everyone and risked nothing. Then he thought about what Lily had said about not deciding until you actually try, about Margaret's observation that sometimes the complicated choice is the right one, about 20 minutes in a parking lot and 4 whispered words that had changed everything. I want to see where this goes, he said. I want to get to know you, not Elena Navarro, the CEO, but you. The person who cried in my arms 5 minutes ago. The person who's tired of being strategic. I want to have conversations that don't feel like negotiations. He stopped himself, then pushed forward anyway. I want to stop pretending I don't feel something when I'm around you. Elena's eyes had gone bright again, but this time it wasn't from tears. That's a lot of wants. Yeah, it is. What about Lily? What about the fact that pursuing this could blow up both our lives? What about the fact that we're both miserable in the lives we're currently living? Daniel interrupted. What about the possibility that taking a risk might actually lead somewhere good instead of somewhere catastrophic? Elena shook her head slowly, but she was smiling, a real smile that transformed her entire face. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Probably both, and you're really okay with all the complications, the gossip and the policies, and the fact that people will make assumptions? I'm not okay with any of it, Daniel said honestly, but I'm less okay with the idea of never finding out what this could be. So yeah, let's figure out the complications together. Elena reached up and touched his face, a gentle exploration, like she was confirming he was real. I ended the engagement with Victor because I couldn't marry someone I didn't love, but I need you to understand something. I didn't do it because of you. I did it because you helped me see that I deserved better than a strategic arrangement. I know. But now, she took a shaky breath. Now I'm sitting here realizing that maybe I know what I actually want, and it terrifies me. What do you want, Elena? She leaned forward and kissed him. It was gentle, questioning, nothing like the dramatic passion of movie scenes. Just a soft press of lips that lasted maybe 3 seconds before Elena pulled back, her eyes searching his face for a reaction. Daniel's heart was hammering. Was that okay? I don't know. Was it? Instead of answering, Daniel kissed her back, still gentle, still careful, but with enough conviction to make his feelings clear. Elena made a small sound against his mouth and leaned into him, one hand coming up to rest against his chest, where she could probably feel his pulse racing. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing harder. Okay, Elena said shakily. That answered that question. Which question? Whether this thing between us is real or just two lonely people looking for an escape. She touched her lips like she was still feeling the kiss. That felt pretty real. Daniel couldn't help but smile. Yeah, it did. They sat close together on the bench, not quite touching, but occupying the same space in a way that felt significant. The park had grown fully dark now, illuminated only by scattered streetlights and the glow from apartment windows in the surrounding buildings. So what happens now? Elena asked quietly. Now we figure out how to do this without destroying our lives. That's not very romantic. No, but it's practical. And I think we both need practical right now. Daniel turned to look at her. First thing, we need to be transparent with HR about the relationship. Get everything documented, make sure we're following company policy. Elena nodded slowly. There are protocols for this. Disclosure forms, potential transfer options if needed. Margaret can help navigate it. Second thing, we go slow. No rushing into anything. No grand gestures that attract attention. We get to know each other like normal people dating. Are we dating? The question was genuine, uncertain. I'd like to be, if you would. I would. Elena's smile was shy, almost girlish. I really would. But Daniel, what about Lily? Have you thought about how you'll explain this to her? The question made Daniel's stomach tighten. Not entirely. But she's smart. She already asked me if I'd met someone. What did you tell her? That I met someone complicated who I probably shouldn't like but kind of do anyway. Elena laughed. That's one way to put it. She told me I should get to know you before deciding if you're too complicated. Daniel found himself smiling at the memory. Pretty wise for a 7-year-old. She sounds amazing. She is. And if we do this, if we really try to make this work, you need to know that she comes first, always, no matter what. I wouldn't want it any other way, Elena said seriously. I'm not trying to insert myself into her life or replace anyone. I just want a chance to see if what we have is worth pursuing. Okay, then we do this carefully, quietly. We figure out the corporate stuff first, then we figure out how to actually be together. Elena reached for his hand again, threading her fingers through his. This is really happening, isn't it? We're really doing this. Unless you've changed your mind in the last 30 seconds. No, I haven't changed my mind. She squeezed his hand. I'm terrified, and it's probably going to be a disaster. And I have no idea how we navigate all the obstacles ahead, but I want to try. Me too. They sat there in the darkness, holding hands like teenagers, and Daniel felt something shift in his chest. A wall coming down, a door opening, the first real breath after years of holding himself carefully still. This was reckless. This was risky. This violated every principle of the careful, controlled life he'd built. But it also felt like waking up after a long sleep. Eventually, they walked back toward the parking area where Elena had left her car, a different one than the sedan from the parking lot, Daniel noticed, and he wondered if she'd gotten the alternator belt fixed or simply switched vehicles. When can I see you again? Elena asked, and the vulnerability in her voice made Daniel's heart ache. I need to figure out childcare. My schedule is pretty rigid during the week. I understand, but she looked disappointed. What about lunch? Tomorrow? We could meet somewhere away from the office. Elena's face brightened. I'd like that. The coffee shop where I met Margaret, 12:30? I'll be there. They stood beside her car, a sleek silver sedan that probably cost more than Daniel made in 3 years, and Daniel felt the weight of what they were starting settle over him. This wasn't just a kiss in a park. This was the beginning of something that would change everything. Elena? He said as she was opening her car door. Yeah? I'm glad you broke your car. She smiled at him over the roof of the sedan. Me too. Even if it was ethically questionable. Especially because it was ethically questionable. Elena laughed and climbed into the car. Through the window, Daniel could see her pause before starting the engine, taking a moment to collect herself. Then she looked up at him and mouthed 2 words. Thank you. Daniel watched her drive away, then walked back to his apartment where Mrs. Chen was reading Lily a story about dragons and brave knights. His daughter looked up when he entered, her sharp eyes immediately assessing his expression. Did it go good? She asked. Did what go good? Your thing, with the complicated person. Mrs. Chen smiled knowingly, but said nothing. Daniel sat down on the couch next to Lily. Yeah, kiddo, it went good. Are you going to see her again? How do you know it's a her? Lily rolled her eyes with 7-year-old exasperation. Because you changed your shirt and you never change your shirt for guy friends. Mrs. Chen laughed outright at that, and Daniel found himself laughing too. You're too smart for your own good, you know that? Yep, Lily snuggled against his side. So are you going to see her again? Yeah, I am. Okay. Can I meet her sometime? The question was so casual, so accepting, that Daniel felt his throat tighten. Maybe. Eventually. We're taking things slow. That's smart, Lily yawned. Mom always said slow and steady wins the race. After Mrs. Chen left and Lily was tucked into bed, Daniel stood in his kitchen with a beer he barely tasted and tried to process everything that had happened. In the span of a week, his entire carefully controlled life had come apart at the seams, and somehow, impossibly, that felt like exactly what needed to happen. His phone buzzed with a message from Elena. I'm home. Thank you for tonight, for being honest with me, for making me feel like maybe I'm not crazy for wanting this. Daniel typed back quickly. You're not crazy, or if you are, we're crazy together. That's oddly comforting. Get some sleep. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night, Daniel. Good night, Elena. He set the phone down and finished his beer, then walked to his bedroom window where he could see the city lights spreading out across the valley below. Somewhere out there, Elena was probably standing at her own window, looking at the same lights, feeling the same mixture of fear and hope. They had no idea how to make this work, no roadmap for navigating the corporate complications or the personal risks or the 1,000 small ways this could fall apart. But for the first time in 7 years, Daniel was willing to try. The next morning arrived with its usual chaos of alarms and breakfast and getting Lily ready for school. But something felt different, lighter somehow, like the air pressure had changed. Lily noticed it too, giving him curious looks over her cereal. You're happy, she observed. I'm always happy. Not like this. You're like, actually happy. Not just dad happy. There's a difference? Yeah? Dad happy is when you smile but your eyes are still sad. This is different. Daniel set down his coffee and looked at his daughter, wondering when she'd become so perceptive. You're right. I am actually happy. Is that okay with you? Lily considered this seriously. Yeah, it's good. You should be actually happy more. I'll work on that. At work, Daniel moved through his morning routine with unusual energy, earning more suspicious looks from Marcus. Okay, now you're creeping me out, Marcus said around 10 o'clock. Yesterday you were rewiring harnesses backwards. Today you're whistling while you work. What happened? Just had a good night. Define good. Mind your own business. Marcus grinned. So it went well. The thing with the CEO. Daniel didn't bother denying it. We're taking things slow, figuring it out. Man, you really know how to pick them. But Marcus didn't sound judgmental, just amazed. Well, good luck. You're going to need it. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Hey, I'm rooting for you, just also preparing for the spectacular fireworks if this goes sideways. At noon, Daniel cleaned up and headed for the coffee shop. Elena was already there, sitting at the same corner table Margaret had chosen, wearing business attire that was somehow both professional and beautiful. She smiled when she saw him, and Daniel felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. Hi, she said as he sat down. Hi yourself. They looked at each other for a moment, and Daniel could see the same mixture of emotions on her face that he was feeling. Nervousness, excitement, the surreal awareness that they were really doing this. I talked to Margaret this morning, Elena said, about the disclosure protocols. We need to file paperwork with HR declaring the relationship and confirming there's no reporting structure between us. Okay. She also suggested that it might be smart to have a third party, someone from HR or legal, aware of how this started, just to protect both of us if questions come up later about whether this was consensual or if there was any coercion. The clinical language made the romance of last night feel suddenly fragile, but Daniel understood why it was necessary. Whatever we need to do to handle this properly. I don't want you to feel like I'm turning this into a corporate transaction, Elena said quickly, but I also need to protect you. If people think I'm taking advantage of my position, they'll think what they think regardless, Daniel interrupted gently. But you're right. We should document everything properly. Make sure we're following the rules. Elena relaxed slightly. Thank you for understanding. They ordered sandwiches neither of them really wanted and spent the next hour talking, not about corporate policies or procedures, but about real things. Elena told him about growing up under constant pressure to excel, about the divorce that had shaken her faith in her own judgment, about the strange loneliness of being powerful but not particularly happy. Daniel told her about Sarah, about the grief that had eventually dulled into manageable sadness, about building a life around Lily that felt stable but incomplete. It was the kind of conversation people have when they're genuinely trying to know each other, and it felt precious in its ordinariness. Can I ask you something? Elena said as they were finishing their sandwiches. Anything. What do you actually want to do? Not for Lily, not for stability, not for anyone else. Just for you. Daniel opened his mouth to answer, then realized he didn't have one ready. I don't know. I haven't thought about that in years. Then maybe you should start thinking about it. Elena reached across the table and touched his hand. Because I meant what I said last night. I don't want to be the only one taking risks here. I want you to want things for yourself, too. The words lodged somewhere deep in Daniel's chest, planting themselves like seeds. What did he want? Not in the abstract future, but right now, in this moment, with this woman looking at him like his answer actually mattered. I want this, he said finally. Whatever this is. I want to see where it goes. Elena smiled. That's a start. They walked back toward the parking lot together, and Daniel was acutely aware of the risk they were taking just being seen together in public. But Elena didn't seem to care, walking beside him with her head held high. Same time tomorrow? She asked. I'll be here. Before she could leave, Daniel caught her hand. Elena? Yeah? I'm glad you're taking this risk. With me. Her expression softened. Me too. Then she was gone, and Daniel was walking back to work with the feeling that his life had just shifted onto a completely different track. He had no idea where it was leading, but for the first time in years, he was actually looking forward to finding out. The disclosure paperwork took 3 days to process, 3 days during which Daniel and Elena maintained careful distance at work while meeting for lunch at the same coffee shop where their careful honesty had started to build into something more substantial. Margaret handled the HR documentation personally, her knowing smile suggesting she took considerable satisfaction in facilitating what most people would consider a corporate liability. You're officially disclosed, Margaret told them on Friday afternoon, sliding a folder across the conference room table where she'd called them both. No reporting structure conflicts, no policy violations, and a very detailed memo explaining the timeline of events to protect both of you if questions arise later. Elena picked up the folder and scanned its contents, her CEO composure firmly in place despite the fact that they were essentially filing paperwork about dating. Thank you, Margaret, for everything. Don't thank me yet. The hard part is just beginning. Margaret looked between them with an expression that was equal parts amused and concerned. The paperwork protects you legally. It doesn't protect you from gossip or judgment or people making assumptions about favoritism. You both need to be prepared for that. Daniel had been thinking about nothing else for 3 days. We know. Do you? Margaret's tone sharpened slightly. Because, Elena, you're about to face questions about whether you're compromising your leadership for personal reasons. And Daniel, people are going to assume you're sleeping your way into better positions. Neither of those narratives is fair, but they're inevitable. Then we deal with them, Elena said calmly, but Daniel could see the tension in her shoulders. Margaret studied them both for a long moment, then sighed. Okay, you're adults, you've been warned. Just remember that transparency helps. The more honest you are about this relationship, the less room there is for people to create their own stories. After Margaret left, Daniel and Elena sat in the conference room looking at each other across the table. The official documentation of their relationship somehow made it feel both more real and more fragile. Second thoughts? Elena asked quietly. Every 5 minutes, Daniel admitted. You? Constantly. But she smiled when she said it. Doesn't change anything, though. No, it doesn't. Elena glanced at her watch. I have a meeting with the board in an hour, but tonight, would you want to have dinner? Actual dinner? Somewhere that's not a coffee shop? I'd need to arrange childcare. Bring Lily, Elena said, and the offer seemed to surprise both of them. I mean, if you're comfortable with that. I know we said we'd go slow, but she already knows you're seeing someone. And I'd like to meet her, if that's not too much too soon. Daniel's chest tightened with something that felt like hope mixed with terror. You sure about that? No, but I think maybe that's the point. We keep doing things we're not sure about until we figure out what we're actually building here. So that evening, Daniel found himself driving toward a restaurant Elena had suggested with Lily, buckled into the back seat, asking questions with the relentless curiosity of a 7-year-old who sensed something significant was happening. Is this the complicated person? Lily asked for the 3rd time. Yes. What's her name? Elena. That's a pretty name. What does she do? Daniel hesitated, trying to figure out how to explain that the woman they were meeting owned the company where he worked without making it sound as bizarre as it actually was. She's my boss, kind of. It's complicated. You keep saying everything's complicated. Because it is. Grown-ups are weird, Lily declared, then went back to her handheld game, apparently satisfied with this conclusion. The restaurant was nicer than anywhere Daniel usually took Lily, the kind of place with cloth napkins and actual silverware instead of plastic. Elena was already there, sitting at a corner booth looking nervous in a way Daniel had never seen before. She stood when they approached, and Daniel could see her hands trembling slightly. "Hi," Elena said, her executive confidence completely absent. "You must be Lily." Lily studied Elena with the same sharp assessment she brought to everything. "You're pretty." Elena blinked in surprise, then laughed, genuine and warm. "Thank you, so are you." "I know." Lily climbed into the booth with total confidence. "Dad says you're complicated." "Lily," Daniel started, mortified, but Elena just smiled. "Your dad's right. I am pretty complicated." "Why?" "Because I make things harder than they need to be sometimes." Lily considered this seriously. "My teacher says that's called overthinking." "Your teacher sounds very wise." They ordered food, and Daniel watched with growing amazement as Elena and Lily fell into easy conversation. Elena asked questions that actually seemed interested in the answers: what Lily liked about school, what books she was reading, whether she preferred soccer or basketball. Lily, for her part, interrogated Elena with the thoroughness of a detective. "Do you have any kids?" Lily asked around a mouthful of pasta. "No." "Do you want kids?" "Lily, that's personal," Daniel interjected, but Elena shook her head. "It's okay. Honestly, I never thought I did. But lately I've been wondering if I just never let myself think about it because it didn't fit into the plan I'd made for my life." "What plan?" Lily asked. "The plan where I work all the time and don't have time for things like family or fun or anything that isn't business." "That's a dumb plan." Elena laughed again, and Daniel saw something shift in her expression, a softening, a genuine enjoyment of this strange dinner that was equal parts date and parental assessment. "You're absolutely right. It is a dumb plan. So make a better plan." "I'm working on it." Lily seemed satisfied with this and returned to her pasta. Under the table, Elena's foot found Daniel's, a small connection that sent warmth spreading through his chest. Later, after they'd finished eating and Lily had excused herself to the bathroom, Elena leaned across the table. "She's amazing," Elena said softly. "She's something," Daniel agreed, "and terrifying. I've negotiated with venture capitalists and hostile board members, but that 7-year-old just gave me the most thorough evaluation I've ever experienced." "Did you pass?" "I don't know yet. What's the verdict timeline?" Before Daniel could answer, Lily returned and delivered her assessment with characteristic bluntness. "I like her. She's nice and she laughs at my jokes, and she didn't try to act like my mom." Daniel felt something release in his chest that he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Good. I'm glad." In the parking lot afterward, Lily ran ahead to look at a fountain while Daniel and Elena lingered near their cars. "Thank you," Elena said, "for letting me meet her. I know that was a risk. Worth it, though." "Yeah?" Elena looked genuinely uncertain. "I wasn't sure. I kept worrying I'd say something wrong or she'd hate me or—" Daniel cut off her spiral by kissing her gently. It was brief, conscious of Lily being nearby, but it conveyed everything he couldn't quite put into words. "You were perfect," he said when they separated. Elena's eyes had gone bright. "I want to see you again. Soon. Not just lunch dates and coffee shops." "What did you have in mind?" "Come over tomorrow night, to my place. I'll cook dinner, or order dinner and pretend I cooked it. We can just be together. No restaurant performance, no worrying about who's watching, just us." Daniel thought about the implications, about spending evening alone with Elena in her home, about what that might lead to and whether he was ready for it. Then he thought about the fact that overthinking had gotten both of them into their respective miserable lives in the first place. "Okay," he said. "Tomorrow night." Elena's smile was radiant. "Really?" "Really. Mrs. Chen owes me more favors, and Lily gave you the stamp of approval, so I'd say we're cleared for forward progress." "Forward progress," Elena repeated. "I like the sound of that." The next evening, Daniel drove to an address Elena had texted him, which turned out to be a modern high-rise overlooking the city. The building had a doorman and marble floors, and the kind of quiet wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Daniel felt profoundly out of place in his jeans and button-down shirt, but the doorman greeted him professionally and directed him to the elevator. Elena's apartment was on the 23rd floor, and when she opened the door, Daniel's first thought was that it looked exactly like he'd expected: sleek, minimalist, expensive, and nothing like a place where anyone actually lived. "I know," Elena said, reading his expression. "It's very sterile. The decorator said it needed to project power and success." "Does it?" "I have no idea. Mostly it just makes me feel like I'm living in a hotel." She stepped aside to let him in. "But the view is pretty great." She wasn't wrong. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city lights spreading out below like a scattered constellation. Daniel walked over to look out, and Elena came to stand beside him. "This is what I thought I wanted," she said quietly. "The penthouse apartment, the corner office, the life that looks impressive from the outside. And it's all very nice, but it's also incredibly lonely." Daniel turned to look at her. "You don't have to live like this." "I know. I'm starting to figure that out." Elena took his hand. "Come on. I actually did cook dinner. Well, I heated up dinner that a very expensive catering service prepared, but I used my own oven, so that counts for something." They ate on her balcony, which wrapped around the corner of the building and offered even more dramatic views. The food was excellent. Some kind of chicken dish with vegetables Daniel couldn't identify, but tasted incredible, and the wine Elena poured was probably worth more than his weekly grocery budget. But what struck Daniel most was how normal it felt. Despite the expensive setting and the bizarre circumstances that had brought them together, sitting across from Elena and talking about their days felt comfortable, natural, real. "I told the board about us yesterday," Elena said during dessert. Daniel's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "How did that go?" "Mixed reactions. A few members expressed concern about optics and potential conflicts of interest. Margaret pointed out that we'd followed all proper protocols, and there's no reporting structure issue. Then Robert Chen, he's been on the board since my father's time, said something I didn't expect." "What?" "He said it was about time I did something for myself instead of for the company." Elena's voice carried a mixture of surprise and emotion. "Apparently I've been so focused on proving myself as CEO that I'd forgotten to have an actual life." His words, not mine. Smart man. He also said that if I was going to scandalously date an employee, at least I picked one with a solid work ethic and good performance reviews. Elena smiled. "Margaret had shown him your file." "Of course she had." They finished dinner and moved inside, settling on Elena's couch with fresh glasses of wine. The apartment still felt sterile, but with Elena curled up beside him, it felt less empty. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said. "Anything." "What happened with Victor? I mean, I know you ended it, but how did he take it?" Elena was quiet for a moment, staring at the wine in her glass. "Better than I expected, actually. He was disappointed. The engagement made sense for both families financially. But he also admitted he'd been having doubts. Said we'd built something that looked perfect on paper but felt hollow in practice." "Sounds familiar." "Yeah." Elena leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder. "I think we were both relieved, honestly. Like we'd been granted permission to stop pretending." "Do you miss him?" "No." "Is that terrible?" "No. It's honest." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Daniel found himself thinking about how strange it was that a month ago he'd been living his carefully controlled life, never imagining that a broken car in a parking lot would lead here. "I have a confession," Elena said eventually. "Another one?" "The alternator belt wasn't the only thing I sabotaged." Daniel pulled back to look at her. "What else did you do?" "Remember how I said I'd been observing you for weeks? I might have also arranged for you to be assigned to certain vehicles. The ones I knew had interesting diagnostic challenges. I wanted to see how you approach problems. You manipulated my work assignments. Technically, yes, but in my defense, you got to work on more interesting projects than you would have otherwise." Daniel didn't know whether to be amused or concerned. "Anything else I should know about?" Elena bit her lip. "I may have also read every performance review you'd ever received, and watched security footage of you mentoring the new apprentice, and asked your supervisor detailed questions about your technical skills under the guise of evaluating potential leadership candidates." So basically, you stalked me. Corporate reconnaissance, Elena corrected, but she looked genuinely embarrassed. I'm not proud of it, but I needed to know if what I was feeling was based on reality or just some fantasy I'd built up about a guy who seemed genuine in a world full of performance. And what did you conclude? That you're exactly who you appear to be, which is somehow more attractive than any fantasy I could have invented. Elena set down her wine glass and turned to face him fully. I know this all started in a really questionable way. The car, the manipulation, the power dynamics. But, Daniel, what I feel when I'm with you, that's not questionable. That's the most certain thing in my life right now. Daniel set down his own glass and pulled her closer. I feel it too. This time when they kissed, it wasn't gentle or careful. It was hungry, urgent, weeks of tension and want finally finding expression. Elena's hands tangled in his hair, and Daniel pulled her onto his lap, both of them breathing hard. Bedroom? Elena gasped between kisses. You sure? Very sure. Unless you're not. Daniel kissed her again, deeper this time, and that seemed to answer the question. Elena's bedroom was as minimalist as the rest of the apartment, but Daniel barely noticed. They tumbled onto the bed together, still kissing, and for a while the world narrowed to just the two of them, skin and breath and the discovery of what they could be together when all the walls finally came down. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the expensive sheets, both of them catching their breath and trying to process what had just happened. So that was, Elena started. Yeah, Daniel agreed. Are we moving too fast? Probably. Do you care? Daniel thought about it, about all the reasons they should be taking this slower, being more careful, protecting themselves from the inevitable complications. Then he thought about how Elena felt in his arms, how right this all seemed despite the chaos. No, he said. I don't care. Elena smiled and pressed closer. Good. Me neither. They stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other, and Daniel felt something settle in his chest that he hadn't even realized had been restless. This wasn't the safe, controlled life he'd built. It was messy and complicated and full of potential pitfalls, but it was also real in a way nothing had been real in years. I should probably head home soon, Daniel said eventually. Mrs. Chen has Lily, but I don't want to take advantage. I know. Elena's arms tightened around him slightly. But stay a little longer? Okay. They talked in the darkness about small things, favorite movies, childhood memories, the strange paths that had led them both to this moment. Elena told him about growing up in boarding schools, about the pressure to excel that had defined her entire childhood. Daniel told her about Sarah, about the grief that had eventually transformed into something gentler, but never quite disappeared. Do you think she'd approve? Elena asked quietly. Of us? Daniel considered the question seriously. Yeah, I think she would. Sarah always said life was too short to waste on being careful. She'd probably tell me I was an idiot for waiting 7 years to start living again. She sounds like she was wonderful. She was. And she'd probably like you. You're both stubborn as hell and too smart for your own good. Elena laughed softly. I'll take that as a compliment. When Daniel finally left around midnight, Elena walked him to the door in one of his shirts, looking young and tousled and nothing like the powerful CEO who terrified board members. Tomorrow? She asked hopefully. I have Lily tomorrow. It's my weekend with her. Right, of course. Elena tried to hide her disappointment, but Daniel saw it anyway. But maybe next week sometime? We could do something normal. Movie, dinner, whatever people usually do when they're dating. I'd like that. I'd really like that. Daniel kissed her goodnight, trying to pour everything he felt into the connection, then forced himself to walk away before he changed his mind about leaving. The drive home felt surreal, like he was returning from some alternate dimension where impossible things happened, but when he checked his phone at a red light, there was already a message from Elena. Thank you for tonight, for everything. I haven't felt this happy in longer than I can remember. Daniel typed back quickly. Me either. Sleep well. You too. And Daniel, I meant what I said earlier about this being the most certain thing in my life. Just wanted you to know that. He saved the message and drove the rest of the way home with something that felt dangerously close to joy blooming in his chest. But the next week brought complications they hadn't fully anticipated. The office gossip that had started as whispers became open speculation. Daniel noticed the looks, heard the conversations that stopped when he entered rooms. Someone started a betting pool about how long the relationship would last before it either imploded or resulted in Daniel getting a suspicious promotion. Marcus pulled him aside on Tuesday morning. "It's getting bad, man. People are saying she's using you as some kind of midlife crisis toy, or you're using her for career advancement. HR is supposedly getting complaints about favoritism, even though you're in completely different divisions." "We followed the protocols," Daniel said tightly. "I know, but people don't care about protocols. They care about the story. And the story they're telling is that the rich CEO is slumming it with the working-class mechanic for entertainment." The description made Daniel's jaw clench. "That's not what's happening." "I know that. You know that. But perception is reality in corporate politics." Marcus looked genuinely concerned. "Just be careful, both of you, because this thing you've got, it's making waves." That evening, Daniel met Elena for dinner at a quiet restaurant across town, and he could see the stress in her face immediately. "Bad day?" he asked. "3 executives have made pointed comments about my judgment. 2 board members called Margaret to express concern about leadership stability, and I overheard my assistant telling someone that I'm going through some kind of breakdown." Elena's smile was brittle. "So yes, bad day. We can cool things off for a while. Let the gossip die down. Is that what you want?" "No, but I don't want you getting destroyed professionally because of me either." Elena reached across the table and grabbed his hand. "I don't care what they're saying. I care about this, about us, and I'm not going to let corporate gossip dictate my personal life." "Elena, no, listen to me." Her eyes were fierce now. "I've spent my entire life making decisions based on what other people think. What's strategic, what's appropriate, what protects my reputation. And I'm done. I'm finally, completely done with that. So let them gossip. Let them make their assumptions. I know what this is, and that's all that matters." Daniel wanted to believe her, wanted to match her conviction with his own. But he was also practical enough to know that conviction didn't pay bills or protect careers. "What if it gets worse?" he asked quietly. "Then we deal with it, together." They finished dinner with forced normalcy, both trying to pretend the weight of judgment wasn't pressing down on them from all sides. But when Daniel drove Elena back to her building, she hesitated before getting out of the car. "Will you come up?" she asked. "Elena, we both have work tomorrow." "I know, I need to be with you for a while. Not thinking about corporate politics or gossip or any of it. Just being together." Daniel saw the vulnerability in her expression and couldn't refuse. "Okay, for a while." They ended up on her couch again, Elena curled against his side while some documentary neither of them was really watching played on the television. The comfort of physical closeness eased some of the day's stress, and Daniel felt Elena gradually relax in his arms. "Thank you," she murmured. "For what?" "For not running when things got complicated. I told you I was in this." "I know, but saying it and proving it are different things." Elena tilted her head to look up at him. "You're proving it." Daniel kissed her forehead. "So are you." They stayed like that until Daniel reluctantly admitted he needed to get home. And even then, Elena walked him to the door with obvious reluctance. "I hate this part," she said. "The part where you leave and I'm alone in this sterile apartment with my thoughts." "You could come stay at my place sometime," Daniel offered, then immediately wondered if that was too much too soon. But Elena's face lit up. "Really? It's not fancy, and Lily would be there, so we'd have to keep things family-friendly. But yeah, if you want." "I want. I really want." So 2 days later, Elena showed up at Daniel's modest apartment building with an overnight bag and an expression that suggested she was about to undertake some grand adventure. Lily greeted her with enthusiasm, already treating Elena like a fixture rather than a visitor, and Daniel felt something shift in his understanding of what they were building. This wasn't just a relationship, it was becoming something more integrated, more real. They ordered pizza and watched movies on Daniel's aging couch, Lily wedged between them, making commentary on everything. When bedtime came, Lily insisted Elena read her a chapter, and Daniel stood in the doorway watching the two of them together with an ache in his chest that was equal parts happiness and fear. This could work. Against all odds and logic, this strange collision of worlds could actually work. Later, after Lily was asleep, Elena and Daniel sat in his small kitchen drinking tea and talking in low voices. I could get used to this, Elena said, looking around the modest space that was probably smaller than her bedroom. It feels like a real home, not like my apartment. You could make your apartment feel like home. Or I could just keep coming here. Elena smiled at him over her mug. Would that be okay? If I wanted to be here more often? Daniel thought about the implications, about what it would mean to have Elena become a regular part of his and Lily's routine, about the gossip that would inevitably intensify when people realized this wasn't just a fling. Then he thought about how right it felt having her here, sitting in his kitchen at 10 o'clock on a Thursday night like she belonged. Yeah, he said, that would be okay. Elena's smile was radiant, and Daniel knew without question that he was falling in love with this woman. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like relief. The realization that he was falling in love should have sent Daniel into a panic, but instead it settled over him like something he'd been expecting all along. He watched Elena sip her tea in his cramped kitchen, her hair still slightly messy from where Lily had insisted on braiding it earlier, and thought about how completely she'd dismantled every wall he'd built around his heart. You're staring, Elena said without looking up. I know. Any particular reason? Daniel could have deflected, could have made a joke, or changed the subject. Instead, he found himself saying, I'm trying to figure out when this stopped being complicated and started being inevitable. Elena's hand stilled around her mug. She looked up at him with an expression that was half hope, half terror. Inevitable? Yeah. Daniel reached across the small table and covered her hand with his. I think I've been falling for you since that night in the parking lot. Maybe even before, when I was just some mechanic you were watching through office windows. I just didn't want to admit it because admitting it meant taking a risk. And now? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Now I think the risk is worth it. Elena set down her mug with trembling hands and moved around the table to stand in front of him. Daniel pulled her down onto his lap, and she came willingly, wrapping her arms around his neck. I love you, she said, the words tumbling out like they'd been held back too long. I know it's too soon and too fast and probably too much, but I love you. I love your daughter and your terrible apartment and the way you fix things like they matter. I love that you see me as a person instead of a CEO or a business opportunity. I love... Daniel kissed her, cutting off the flow of words, and Elena melted into him with a small sound of relief. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. I love you too, Daniel said, just so we're clear. Elena laughed, the sound caught between joy and tears. Okay, good. That's good. They sat like that for a while, just holding each other in Daniel's kitchen, while the refrigerator hummed and the city sounds filtered in through the windows. It felt monumental and ordinary at the same time, two people admitting feelings in the middle of a Thursday night. What happens now? Elena asked eventually. Now we figure out how to make this work long term, because I'm not interested in temporary anymore. Me neither. Elena pulled back to look at him seriously. But Daniel, the gossip isn't going to stop. If anything, it's going to get worse when people realize this isn't just a fling. There will be accusations of favoritism, questions about my judgment, pressure from the board. So we face it together, Daniel interrupted. We be so transparent and above board that no one can claim there's anything inappropriate happening. We document everything. We follow every policy, and we prove that two people can have a relationship without it compromising professional integrity. You make it sound simple. It won't be, but I think we're both done with the complicated lie of pretending we don't want this. Elena nodded slowly, and Daniel could see her CEO mind already working through strategies and solutions. Okay, then we need a plan. A real one. Over the next hour, sitting in Daniel's kitchen with mugs of tea that went cold and forgotten, they mapped out how to handle the reality of their relationship. Elena would maintain strict professional boundaries at work, making sure Daniel received no preferential treatment. Daniel would continue his work in the maintenance division with the same dedication he'd always shown, proving through performance that he'd earned his position independent of their relationship. They would be open about dating but private about the details, giving people no ammunition for accusations while also refusing to hide like they were doing something wrong. Margaret suggested something else, Elena said hesitantly. She thinks I should promote you, not because we're dating, but because you actually deserve it. Your performance reviews have been exemplary for years, and the technical skills you have are wasted on basic maintenance work. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. That's exactly the kind of thing that will make people say you're showing favoritism. Which is why Margaret suggested putting you through a formal evaluation process. Third-party assessment, skills testing, interviews with people from other divisions. If you pass, and she's confident you would, then the promotion is earned and documented, not a gift from your girlfriend. And if I don't want to be promoted? Elena looked surprised. Why wouldn't you? Because I like my job. I like fixing things, working with my hands, solving mechanical problems. I don't need a management position or a bigger salary to feel validated. But you could have both. You could still do technical work, but at a higher level. Lead projects instead of just executing them. Mentor other mechanics in a formal capacity instead of informally. Elena's eyes were bright with excitement. I've been studying the operations division, and there's a huge gap for someone with your skills and approach. You could build something real there. Daniel wanted to dismiss the idea outright, to stay safely in the role he'd occupied for 7 years. But then he remembered Elena asking him what he wanted for himself, not for Lily or for stability, but just for him. Let me think about it, he said finally. Okay? Elena kissed him softly. No pressure. I just want you to know that you have options, that you're not locked into one path forever. They eventually went to bed in Daniel's room, Elena borrowing one of his shirts and curling up against him in the narrow mattress that was barely big enough for 2 people. It was nothing like her expensive bedroom with its high thread count sheets and climate control, but Elena fell asleep almost immediately, her breathing evening out into the peaceful rhythm of someone who felt safe. Daniel lay awake longer, thinking about everything they'd discussed. The promotion, the gossip, the future they were trying to build despite all the obstacles stacked against them. And underneath it all, the simple truth that he loved this woman and was willing to fight for her. The next morning, Lily woke them up by jumping on the bed with the subtlety of a small tornado. Breakfast time, she announced. And Elena's still here, so can we make pancakes? The special ones with chocolate chips? Elena laughed and sat up, her hair wild from sleep. I don't know how to make pancakes. Dad will teach you. He's really good at it. So they stumbled into the kitchen together, and Daniel found himself showing Elena how to mix batter and heat the griddle while Lily supervised with the authority of a 7-year-old who knew exactly how things should be done. It was chaotic and messy and nothing like the carefully controlled mornings Daniel usually orchestrated, but it was also perfect in a way that made his chest ache. This was what a family could feel like, he realized. Not perfect or polished, just real. After breakfast, Elena reluctantly had to leave for a meeting, but she paused at the door to kiss both Daniel and Lily goodbye. Thank you, she said to Lily seriously, for sharing your dad with me. Lily considered this with her usual gravity. You make him happy, so that's okay. I try. Keep trying, Lily said, then returned to her Legos, the matter apparently settled. Elena looked at Daniel with such open emotion that he had to kiss her again. I'll see you Monday? Lunch. Same place. It's a date. But Monday brought a complication neither of them had anticipated. Daniel arrived at work to find Tom waiting for him with an expression that promised bad news. My office. Now. Daniel followed his supervisor into the small room that smelled like coffee and stress, his mind already running through worst-case scenarios. Tom closed the door and turned to face him. I got a call from corporate HR this morning. Someone filed a formal complaint about your relationship with Elena Navarro. Daniel felt ice settle in his stomach. We disclosed everything properly, followed all the protocols. I know, Margaret confirmed that, but the complaint isn't about policy violations. Tom pulled out a printed email and slid it across the desk. It's claiming that Elena is using company resources to spend time with you, that she's been seen at your apartment building, that she's neglecting her duties to pursue a personal relationship with a subordinate employee. That's bullshit. We see each other outside of work hours, and I'm not her subordinate. We're in completely different divisions with no reporting structure. I know that. You know that. But whoever filed this complaint is building a case that Elena's judgment is compromised. Tom looked genuinely sympathetic. And they sent copies to 3 board members. Daniel read through the email, his anger building with each line. The language was carefully constructed to sound concerned about company welfare, while actually being a character assassination of both him and Elena. It described their relationship as inappropriate fraternization and suggested Elena was emotionally unstable following her broken engagement. "Who sent this?" Daniel asked. "It's anonymous, but HR is obligated to investigate." Daniel stood up, his mind already racing. "I need to talk to Elena. She's in meetings all morning, but Daniel—" Tom caught his arm. "Be careful. Whoever's doing this wants to cause problems. Don't give them ammunition." Daniel found Margaret instead, catching her between meetings in a hallway outside the executive offices. She took one look at his face and steered him into an empty conference room. "You heard?" she said. "Tom showed me the email. Margaret, this is a coordinated attack." "Yes, I know." Margaret pulled out her phone and showed him 3 more similar emails, all from different anonymous accounts, all sent to different board members over the past week. "Someone is running a campaign to undermine Elena's position by targeting your relationship." "Who would do this?" "My money's on Richard Foster. He's one of the old guard who wanted the CEO position to go to someone from within the existing leadership structure. He's been looking for ways to prove Elena's too young and inexperienced for the role." Daniel felt his jaw clench. "So he's using us. He's using the optics of your relationship to paint Elena as impulsive and unprofessional, and it's working. The board is calling an emergency meeting tomorrow to discuss leadership concerns." "Can they remove her?" "They can vote no confidence, which would force her to step down or face a prolonged battle for control." Margaret's expression was grim. Elena owns majority shares, but if the board declares her unfit to lead, it triggers clauses in the corporate charter that could drag this out for months. "What can we do?" "Fight back with facts. Show that Elena's been an exemplary CEO, that the company's performance has improved under her leadership, that your relationship has had zero impact on operations." Margaret paused. "But Daniel, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that the board might pressure Elena to end things with you, or pressure you to resign." "I'm not resigning, and Elena's not ending this." "Then you both need to be ready for war." Daniel found Elena that evening at her apartment, already surrounded by documents and looking like she hadn't slept. She stood when he entered, and he could see the strain in every line of her body. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "This is my fault. I should have anticipated—" Daniel crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, cutting off her self-recrimination. "This isn't your fault. This is corporate politics by people who were threatened by you long before I came into the picture." Elena sagged against him. "The board meeting is tomorrow. Richard Foster has been calling members all day, building his case that I'm too emotionally compromised to lead effectively." "What's your strategy?" "Prove him wrong. Show up with performance metrics, strategic plans, evidence that the company's doing better under my leadership than it has in years." Elena pulled back to look at him. "But Daniel, they're going to ask about us, about whether I plan to continue the relationship. And what are you going to tell them?" "The truth? That I'm in love with a man who has nothing to do with my ability to run this company. That my personal life is separate from my professional responsibilities. That they can either accept that or I'll take my majority shares and replace every single one of them." Daniel couldn't help but smile. "That's my CEO." "Your CEO who's possibly about to get voted out of her own company. Then we make sure that doesn't happen." They spent the evening preparing Elena's presentation, Daniel offering perspective from the operational side, while Elena built her case with the strategic brilliance that had made her successful in the first place. By midnight, they had something solid, a comprehensive review of Elena's first 6 months as CEO, showing improved efficiency, reduced costs, and increased employee satisfaction across multiple divisions. "There's one more thing I want to include," Elena said, pulling up a document on her laptop. "The third-party evaluation results for your potential promotion." Daniel had forgotten about that in the chaos of the past week. "Those came back already?" Margaret fast-tracked it. "Daniel, you scored in the 95th percentile on technical skills and the 98th percentile on leadership potential. The evaluator said you're one of the strongest candidates they've assessed in years." Elena turned the laptop so he could see the detailed report. "This proves that if I promote you, it's because you've earned it, not because we're dating." Daniel read through the evaluation, seeing his own skills and experience assessed by complete strangers who'd found him worthy of advancement. It was validating in a way he hadn't expected. "Are you going to accept it?" Elena asked quietly. "The promotion? Are you offering it?" "Officially, yes, head of technical operations. You'd oversee all maintenance divisions, implement new training programs, work directly with me on fleet management strategy. It's a significant increase in responsibility and salary." Elena watched his face carefully. "But only if you want it. I won't pressure you into a position you don't want just to prove a point to the board." Daniel thought about 7 years of doing the same work, the comfortable routine that had kept him safe, but also kept him from growing. He thought about what Lily had said about making a better plan, about what Elena had asked him weeks ago. What did he actually want for himself? "I want it," he said, "not to prove anything to anyone, but because I'm ready to build something instead of just maintaining what already exists." Elena's smile was brilliant. "Okay, then I'm officially offering you the position. And I'm officially accepting." They sealed it with a kiss that quickly deepened into something more urgent, both of them needing the physical connection to ground themselves against the chaos swirling around them. They made love on Elena's couch with desperate intensity, reaffirming what they meant to each other in the only language that felt adequate. Afterward, lying tangled together in the expensive sheets of Elena's bed, Daniel voiced the fear he'd been carrying. What if they make you choose the board? What if they say it's the company or me? Elena was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. "Then I choose you. Elena, I'm serious. I spent 36 years building a life around what other people wanted me to want. I finally found something real, something that makes me feel alive instead of just successful. I'm not giving that up. Not for a board position, not for family approval, not for anything." "You'd really walk away from the company?" "I'd walk away from anything that required me to give up who I am." Elena propped herself up to look at him. "But I don't think it'll come to that. I think tomorrow I'm going to show them exactly why they hired me in the first place." The board meeting was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon, giving Daniel time to work a half shift before heading home to change into the one suit he owned. Elena had offered to send a car, but he drove himself, needing the time to think. Margaret met him in the lobby of the corporate building, looking elegant and fierce in a way that suggested she was ready for battle. "Elena's already upstairs," Margaret said. "The board is gathering now. They've invited you to attend since the relationship concerns you directly." "Is that normal?" "Nothing about this is normal, but it works in our favor. Let them see you in person instead of just as ammunition for their arguments." The boardroom was exactly what Daniel expected. Dark wood, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view that probably cost more than most people's houses. 8 board members sat around the massive table, ranging from Robert Chen, who Margaret had said supported Elena, to Richard Foster, whose expression of barely concealed satisfaction made Daniel's hands curl into fists. Elena sat at the head of the table in a charcoal suit, her hair pulled back severely, every inch the powerful CEO. But when her eyes met Daniel's across the room, he saw the vulnerability underneath the armor. "Mr. Brooks," Richard Foster said, his tone suggesting he was addressing something he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. "Thank you for joining us. Please, sit." Daniel took the chair next to Margaret, acutely aware that he was the only person in the room who didn't belong to the world of corporate power. "Let's begin," Foster continued. "We're here to discuss serious concerns about CEO Elena Navarro's judgment and fitness to lead this company. Specifically, regarding her relationship with Mr. Brooks, a maintenance employee, which has raised questions about professional boundaries and decision-making capability." Elena's expression didn't change, but Daniel saw her hands tighten slightly on the portfolio in front of her. "I've prepared a comprehensive review of my performance over the past 6 months," Elena said calmly. "I believe it addresses any legitimate concerns about my leadership." For the next 30 minutes, Elena presented her case with devastating precision. Company efficiency was up 18%. Employee turnover was down 23%. 3 major contracts had been secured that were projected to increase revenue by $40 million over the next 2 years. Every metric showed improvement under her leadership. "Impressive numbers," Foster admitted grudgingly. "But they don't address the core concern. You've entered into a romantic relationship with an employee. You've been observed spending significant time at his residence. There are questions about whether company resources have been used to facilitate this relationship. I followed every corporate policy regarding disclosure and conflict of interest, Elena responded. Mr. Brooks and I are in different divisions with no reporting structure. Our relationship is documented with HR and has been approved through appropriate channels. But the optics are that I'm a 36-year-old woman who happens to be dating someone while also running a company. If this board is suggesting that female CEOs should remain celibate to avoid questions about their judgment, I suggest we revisit our understanding of employment discrimination law. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Robert Chen was openly smiling, but Foster wasn't done. What about the promotion you're planning to offer Mr. Brooks? Isn't that evidence of favoritism? Mr. Brooks underwent a third-party evaluation conducted by an independent assessment firm with no connection to this company or to me personally. Elena slid copies of the evaluation across the table. He scored in the top 5% of candidates assessed. The promotion is based entirely on merit and documented qualifications. Convenient timing, though, Foster pressed. This was Daniel's moment. He stood up, and every eye in the room turned to him. With respect, Mr. Foster, I didn't ask for this promotion. I didn't ask to be evaluated. Ms. Navarro insisted on third-party assessment specifically to avoid accusations of favoritism. Daniel kept his voice level, professional. I've worked for this company for 7 years with exemplary performance reviews. I've trained apprentices, solved complex technical problems, and improved efficiency in the maintenance division. Those facts existed before I ever met Elena Navarro, and they'll exist regardless of whether we're dating. Mr. Brooks, Robert Chen spoke up for the first time. Can you tell us how you and Miss Navarro met? Daniel glanced at Elena, who nodded slightly. Time for complete transparency. Her car broke down in the company parking lot. I helped her. We talked, and I fell for a woman who seemed exhausted by the weight of everyone else's expectations. Daniel looked directly at Foster. I didn't know she was the CEO. I didn't know she was wealthy or powerful or connected. I just knew she was someone who needed help and treated me like a person instead of a position. Very touching, Foster said dryly. But it doesn't change the fact that this relationship creates complications that reflect poorly on the company's leadership. Actually, Margaret interrupted, I think it reflects quite well. Elena has been completely transparent about the relationship, has followed every policy, and has continued to exceed performance benchmarks. The only complication is that some members of this board are uncomfortable with a female CEO having a personal life. That's not what this is about, Foster snapped. Isn't it? Robert Chen leaned forward. Richard, you've been opposed to Elena's appointment from the beginning. You wanted someone from the old guard, someone who would maintain the status quo instead of pushing for innovation. This relationship is just a convenient excuse to undermine her position. I have legitimate concerns. About what? Her performance metrics are exceptional. Employee satisfaction is higher than it's been in a decade. The company is profitable and growing. The only thing that's changed is that she's dating someone you consider beneath her station. Foster's face reddened. It is exactly that, Chen continued. And speaking as someone who's been on this board for 20 years, I'm tired of the political games. Elena Navarro is the best CEO this company has had in my tenure. If you want to remove her, you're going to need better reasons than the fact that she's fallen in love. The room fell silent. Daniel could feel the tension crackling between board members, alliances forming and fracturing in real time. Finally, another board member, an older woman named Patricia Wells, spoke up. I move that we take a vote of confidence in CEO Navarro's leadership based solely on her professional performance, excluding any consideration of her personal relationships. I second that motion, Chen said immediately. The vote was 6-2 in Elena's favor, with only Foster and one of his allies voting against. The relief on Elena's face was visible for just a moment before her professional mask snapped back into place. Thank you for your confidence, Elena said formally. I won't disappoint you. As the meeting adjourned, Foster approached Daniel with an expression of barely controlled anger. You think you've won, he said quietly, but this isn't over. Eventually, she'll realize you're nothing but a liability. And when she does, Mr. Foster, Elena's voice cut through the threat like a blade. She'd appeared beside Daniel without either of them noticing. If you ever speak to Daniel that way again, I'll use my majority shares to call for your removal from this board. Are we clear? Foster's jaw worked, but he said nothing, just turned and stalked out of the boardroom. Elena waited until they were alone, just her, Daniel, and Margaret, before letting her composure crack. She sat down heavily in one of the leather chairs, her hands shaking slightly. That was terrifying, she admitted. That was brilliant, Margaret corrected. You demolished every argument they had. We demolished them, Elena said, looking at Daniel. You standing up and defending yourself, that changed the dynamic completely. Daniel sat down beside her and took her hand. So what happens now? Now we get back to work. You start your new position, I continue running the company, and we prove that all of this was worth fighting for. Elena squeezed his hand. Together. The transition into his new role was smoother than Daniel expected. The mechanics he'd worked alongside for years were initially skeptical about his promotion, but when they saw he was still willing to get his hands dirty and solve problems alongside them, the skepticism transformed into respect. Daniel built training programs, improved scheduling efficiency, and implemented new diagnostic protocols that reduced vehicle downtime by 30%. Elena, freed from the immediate threat of board opposition, threw herself into the strategic work she'd been planning for months. She launched a logistics innovation division that Daniel helped design, combining his technical expertise with her business vision. The company started winning contracts they'd never been competitive for before, and within 3 months, the board that had questioned her judgment was singing her praises. But the real changes happened outside the office. Elena spent more and more time at Daniel's apartment until one night, about 4 months after the board meeting, she simply didn't leave. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, her life merged with theirs. Her clothes appearing in Daniel's closet, her laptop on his kitchen table, her voice part of the morning chaos as they got Lily ready for school. Lily adapted with the easy acceptance of children, treating Elena's presence as a natural evolution rather than a dramatic change. They developed their own relationship independent of Daniel. Elena helping with homework, attending soccer games, teaching Lily about business concepts in ways that made an 8-year-old feel sophisticated. One Saturday morning, Daniel woke to find Elena and Lily making pancakes together without his supervision, both of them covered in flour, and laughing about some private joke. "Dad," Lily called when she saw him, "Elena taught me how to flip them. Watch." She demonstrated with more enthusiasm than skill, sending a pancake sailing across the kitchen. Elena caught it with a spatula, and both of them dissolved into giggles. Daniel stood in the doorway of his kitchen, watching this scene, and felt something settle into place that he hadn't even known was missing. This was his family now. Not perfect, not what he'd planned, but real and whole in his. That evening, after Lily was in bed, Daniel found Elena on the balcony of her apartment. They'd started splitting time between both places, though his remained the one that felt most like home. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said, coming to stand beside her. "Always." "Are you happy?" "Really happy. Not just content or satisfied, but actually happy." Elena turned to look at him, and her smile was radiant. "Happier than I've ever been." "Why?" "Because I want to make sure this is what you want, not what you settled for, or what seemed better than your previous life. I want to know that you chose this deliberately." "Daniel Brooks, are you seriously questioning whether I want to be here?" Elena's tone was teasing, but her eyes were serious. "I gave up an arranged engagement, fought a corporate board, and moved into an apartment that's smaller than my walk-in closet. Does that seem like settling to you? When you put it that way, I chose you. I chose this life. I chose the chaos of making pancakes with an 8-year-old and having dinner in your cramped kitchen and falling asleep next to someone who sees me as a person instead of a portfolio." Elena took his hands. "This isn't settling. This is the first real choice I've made in my entire life." Daniel kissed her, trying to pour every ounce of love and gratitude into the connection. When they finally pulled apart, Elena was smiling. "I have something for you," she said, pulling a small box from her pocket. Daniel's heart stuttered. "Elena, it's not what you think. Or maybe it is. I don't know. I've never done this before." She opened the box to reveal a simple silver band. "I'm not proposing. not officially, but I wanted you to have this as a promise. That I'm in this for the long term. That you and Lily are my family now. That whatever comes next, we face it together." Daniel took the ring with shaking hands. It was elegant and understated, exactly his style, and when he slipped it on his finger, it fit perfectly. "How did you know my size?" "I stole one of your other rings and had it sized. Margaret helped." Elena was grinning now, pleased with herself. "Do you like it?" "I love it. But Elena, I don't have anything—" "You have everything," she interrupted. "You have this life you've built, this family you're letting me be part of. That's more than I ever thought I'd have." Daniel pulled her close, and they stood together on the balcony, watching the city lights, both wearing rings that represented a future they were building together. A year later, Daniel stood in the maintenance bay, now significantly upgraded and expanded, watching the new apprentices work through a diagnostic problem. He'd built a training program that had become a model for other divisions, and the mechanics who'd once been his peers now reported to him with respect earned through competence rather than title. Elena appeared in the doorway of the bay, still slightly out of place in her executive attire, but no longer afraid to get grease on her shoes. The company had grown under her leadership, acquiring 2 smaller competitors and becoming an industry leader in logistics innovation. But she'd also loosened her grip on control, delegating more and trusting her team, making time for the life she'd built outside these walls. "Ready?" she asked. Daniel nodded and grabbed his jacket. They were picking up Lily from school together, a Friday tradition they'd maintained even as their professional responsibilities grew. In the car, Elena took his hand, and Daniel noticed she was still wearing the matching band she'd bought herself 6 months after giving him his. They'd never officially gotten engaged, never made grand announcements, or posted on social media. They'd just quietly built a life together, one deliberate choice at a time. "I've been thinking," Elena said as they drove toward Lily's school. "Dangerous." She swatted his arm playfully. "I want to sell my penthouse apartment." Daniel glanced at her in surprise. "Really? It's never felt like home. Not like your place does." "Our place," she corrected. "I want to put that money towards something else. Maybe a house with a yard where Lily can play. Maybe somewhere with enough room for all of us without feeling cramped." "All of us?" Daniel repeated carefully. Elena's hand moved to her stomach in a gesture so subtle he almost missed it. "I'm pregnant." The car swerved slightly before Daniel got control of it again. He pulled over to the side of the road and turned to stare at Elena, who was watching him with nervous hope. "You're about 8 weeks. I wanted to wait until I was sure before telling you." Elena was gripping her hands together tightly. "I know we never talked about having kids together. I know Lily is already your priority, and this might complicate—" Daniel kissed her, cutting off the anxious spiral, and when he pulled back, both of them had tears in their eyes. "I love you," he said. "And I love that we're having a baby, and I love that you want to buy a house with a yard. I love all of it." Elena's smile was brilliant through her tears. "Yeah?" "Yeah." Daniel rested his hand over hers on her stomach. "Does Lily know?" "Not yet. I wanted to tell you first. She's going to lose her mind with excitement, or be horrified that she has to share you. Probably both." They sat in the car for a few more minutes, just holding each other and processing the magnitude of this new development. Then Elena checked her watch. "We're going to be late picking her up." "She'll survive." "Daniel Brooks, are you suggesting we make your daughter wait because we're having a moment?" "I'm suggesting that some moments are worth being late for." Elena laughed and kissed him again, and Daniel thought about the impossible path that had led them here. From a parking lot confession to a corporate battle to this moment in a car on a random Friday afternoon, preparing to tell an 8-year-old that she was going to be a big sister. It wasn't the life he'd planned. It wasn't safe or predictable or carefully controlled, but it was real. It was honest. It was everything he'd been too afraid to want. They arrived at Lily's school 15 minutes late, and she came running out with her backpack bouncing, launching herself at Elena with the easy affection that had developed over months of pancake breakfasts and homework help and bedtime stories. "Guess what?" Lily announced. "I got an A on my science project." "Oh, that's amazing," Elena said, and Daniel could hear the emotion in her voice. "We should celebrate." "Ice cream?" "Always ice cream," Lily agreed. Then she looked between them with those sharp, observant eyes. "But that's not why you're late. What's going on?" Daniel and Elena exchanged glances. They'd planned to wait to have a proper family discussion at home. But Lily was too perceptive to fool, and besides, they'd built this family on honesty. "We have some news," Daniel said. "Good news. Elena and I are having a baby." Lily's eyes went wide. For a moment she was completely silent, processing. Then a grin spread across her face that was pure joy. "I'm going to be a big sister?" "If that's okay with you," Elena said carefully. "Okay, it's amazing." Lily threw her arms around Elena's waist. "Can I help pick out names? Can I teach them stuff? Are they going to share my room or have their own room?" Elena laughed, the sound mixing relief and happiness. "We'll figure all of that out together, as a family." "As a family," Lily repeated, testing the words. Then she looked up at Elena seriously. "Does this mean you're going to marry my dad?" Daniel choked slightly, but Elena just smiled. "Would that be okay with you? Obviously, you basically live with us anyway. You should make it official." "Well then," Elena said, turning to Daniel with a mischievous smile. "Daniel Brooks, will you marry me?" It wasn't traditional. It wasn't planned. It was happening in a school parking lot with his 8-year-old daughter as a witness and ice cream waiting as a celebration. It was perfect. "Yes," Daniel said. "Absolutely yes." Lily cheered loud enough that other parents turned to look, and Elena kissed him while their daughter danced around them chanting about weddings and babies and being a big sister. 6 months later, they stood in a small ceremony with just close friends and family, exchanging vows that promised partnership and honesty and building a life together one choice at a time. Margaret was Elena's maid of honor, looking supremely satisfied with herself. Marcus stood as Daniel's best man, still amazed that his friend had somehow ended up marrying the CEO. Lily stood between them during the ceremony, holding a pillow with their rings, looking important and happy and exactly like she belonged there. And when the officiant pronounced them married, when Daniel kissed his wife while their daughter cheered and their friends applauded, he thought about 4 whispered words in a dark parking lot that had changed everything. "I wish you were mine." Now they were each other's, Elena and Daniel and Lily and the baby that would arrive in 3 months. A family built from honesty and risk and the courage to want something more than the lives they'd carefully constructed. That evening, back at the house they'd bought with the yard Lily had wanted, Daniel found Elena standing at the window of what would become the nursery, her hand resting on her growing stomach. "Any regrets?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. Elena turned to look at him, her smile soft and genuine. "Not a single one. Not even sabotaging your car? Especially not that. Best questionable decision I ever made." Daniel laughed and pulled her close, both of them looking out at the yard where Lily was playing with the neighbor's dog, her laughter carrying through the open window. "I love you," Elena said quietly. "I love this life we've built. I love that we took the risk." "I love you too," Daniel said, "and I'm glad you were brave enough to say it first." In a parking lot, like a total weirdo, like a person who knew what she wanted and was willing to be honest about it. Elena tilted her head up to kiss him, and Daniel felt the same spark he'd felt that first night, the recognition of something real and true and worth fighting for. Outside, Lily called for them to come watch her teach the dog a new trick. Elena laughed and took Daniel's hand, pulling him toward the door and the life they'd built together. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what either of them had planned, but it was theirs. Completely, honestly, beautifully theirs. And that was everything they'd ever needed.